across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell, and you're very, very welcome to Talk Drive. There's loads to talk about, and that is because 500,000 shoplifting offences have been recorded by the police for the first time. Over 5,700 crimes unsolved every day last year. We're asking whether pepper spray should be used in young offenders institutions, and millions of vapes have been seized and an illegal trade crackdown. Loads of crime stories around today. We're talking about all of that. Also, Nigel Farage vows to create a minister for deportations if he's Prime Minister to boot out foreign criminals. He has slammed an invasion of migrants, as he calls it. Also, really interestingly, in America, Donald Trump, the president, says, Vladimir, stop. He says he is not happy with the deadly Russian strikes on Kyiv and what is happening there. We're also talking about a story I find really interesting here in the UK. The Liberal Democrats have a policy I agree with. Yes, really. They're saying that people should be fined for not using headphones and playing music loudly on public transport. It drives me up the wall. £1,000 is the maximum penalty. So just like other antisocial behaviour, there'd be a small fine to start, and then if you do it repeatedly, it would rack up. What do you think about that? 0344 499 1000. We'll have a sports update, of course, as the show goes on. We'll talk as well about Harry and Meghan. They say there should be stronger social media guidelines and laws. This is as the government is considering a social media curfew for children. What do you make of all of that? As always, this is my show, but it's your show too. I want to make sure that as many viewers and listeners get on the air as possible. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember, the main number does three things. You can give me a ring, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can send me a WhatsApp voice message. Less than a minute, please. Let's get your views on the air. 0344 499 1000. Plenty to talk about between now and 7 here on Talk. Well, let's start with some of those really shocking crime statistics. 500,000 shoplifting offences recorded by police for the first time. Peter Blexley is our crime commentator. He's a former Metropolitan Police detective. He's an author, speaker, presenter of Crime Suspects as well. Peter, really, this is a huge and growing problem. We're seeing the number of shoplifting offences recorded by police in England and Wales in a year has surpassed 500,000 for the first time on record. Does this surprise you, Peter, or perhaps not?
No, disappointingly, I'm not in the slightest bit surprised, because this epidemic of shoplifting is blighting our high streets, our towns, our villages, our cities, and people are simply stealing with impunity. But these figures are not reliable. I repeat, they are not reliable, because so many offences of shoplifting are not reported. Shopkeepers can't be bothered because they know there will be no investigation, and consequently they don't want to waste their time filling out a form online to report it. And so many other offences are simply unreported, and therefore these figures do not reflect the dire situation that we're in.
How underreported do you think it is? I mean, it's probably impossible to know how many actual crimes there are, but do you think, are we talking about 50% of them being reported, 70%? I mean, what's your estimation there? Or perhaps that's a silly question because you can't possibly know the answer.
Well, all I do know is my local corner shop, the owner of whom is an absolute stalwart of our community and a hugely respected man, doesn't report his cases of shoplifting, because people go in there, grab 2 or 3 items, they come to maybe £5, £6, £7 or £8 and run out. And he's a busy man with a shop to run. He can't afford to not serve customers by spending time online to report it. Now, I know that's a very unscientific and it's anecdotal, but if that was rolled out across the rest of the country, then the scale of this is absolutely huge. But there is something that could be done.
And what is that?
Well, let's look at how the police mobilised last year. When those appalling riots took place, the police nationwide mobilised about 6,000 police officers to quell the rioting, and that had to be done. Last year, the Metropolitan Police, for the Notting Hill Carnival, mobilised an astonishing figure of some 7,000 police officers to deal with that vast event. Now, if there was the will, not just the policing will, but the political will, to mobilise those numbers of police officers, say for a week, and to place them on every high street, in every town, village, city, hamlet, and try and really stamp down on this problem, then I think a real positive week of action could help. But of course, there will be hurdles to this. The government are going to say, please don't do it, because the Crown Prosecution Service wouldn't be able to cope with the number of cases. The courts wouldn't be able to cope with the number of cases. And of course, there's no space in the prisons. So all of my idea, sadly, would appear to be wishful thinking.
I wonder what you make of the response from the Policing Minister, Dame Diana Johnson. She said the Labour government will not tolerate the criminality blighting our communities. That's why the Labour government is putting almost 3,000 more bobbies on the beat in neighbourhood rules this year. And under our leadership, these crimes will receive the attention they deserve. We are already starting to reverse the Tories' decline, a decade of decline on charge rates. Do you believe her?
Talk's cheap, policing's expensive. There simply aren't the number of officers to deal with these crimes because, of course, generations of senior police chiefs have allowed policing to become a social service rather than a police force. And they're busy doing so many other things which quite really are not police matters. But there you go. That's what we're confronted with these days. What we really need is a police service across the country to focus on crime. Not non-crime hate incidents, not trying to police free speech, but crime. Crime that affects people. Not only does this shoplifting epidemic affect the shopkeepers, it affects us, the public, because we don't like to see it and we witness it. And it adds to that overall feeling of lawlessness and helplessness and the fact that it appears that this country is going down the tubes.
The Liberal Democrats are renewing their calls on the government to scrap police and crime commissioners. They want to invest the savings from that in frontline policing, as new statistics are revealing the extent of unsolved crime in the year ending December 24, 5,700 crimes unsolved every day last year. Police and crime commissioners, good idea, bad idea? What do you think, Peter?
Elected police and crime commissioners were the brainchild of the previous Tory government in their early days of power. And these are elected, generally speaking, nobodies. Most of them are aligned to a political party, hence they get the campaigning resources that they need to get elected. There's some stunningly untalented people fulfilling the roles of police and crime commissioners the length and breadth of the country. These were invented as an alternative method of holding the police to account rather than the local police authorities, which did the job previously and didn't cost any money and were made up of councillors and other volunteers, and there was a lot of local accountability. So many of these police and crime commissioners are now sops to their chief constables. They don't really hold them to account, they cosy up to them. And consequently, we are not getting the police accountability that people need. And in the major cities, the mayors fulfil this role as well. And if in London, Sadiq Khan did not have the role of police and crime commissioner, you can bet your bottom dollar I would have stood for election.
It's very interesting that in another part of crime solving, trading standards have seized more than 6 million illegal vaping products. This is new analysis showing that one of the teams responsible for tracking down the illicit goods, they're talking about ban on the sale of single-use disposable vapes, where they're seized from, where they go to, and the capacity in a normal vape is about 600 puffs, about 20 cigarettes, but these sort of super vapes that have about 200 cigarettes in one vape. I mean, this is bound to be the tip of the iceberg in terms of illegal vapes that are being lifted, especially when vapes are getting more expensive.
Absolutely, and if we need to have any scale of this issue, just look at how many vape shops have sprung up in recent years on the high streets, in stations, for example, and elsewhere. It's a massive problem. Vaping's very good, I hear, if people want to give up cigarettes, so that's fine, but it's very bad in terms of litter, and there's a huge problem with these things being discarded. They're massively damaging for the environment, and I strongly suspect that most of them are manufactured in China and consequently shipped around the globe, and therefore they're creating yet more problems on our beleaguered, tatty, underperforming and largely ignored high streets.
Yeah. Peter, just one more thing I want to take your temperature on. This is about the thought that pepper spray can now be used in young offenders institutions. The rate of assault on staff is 14 times higher than in adult prisons. What do you make of that, Peter?
About time too. Quite personally, I'd give staff in prisons AK-47s to maintain order, because too many of our prison officers are going to work and getting violently assaulted by inmates, particularly in these young offender institutions. But of course, we had that dreadful attack on 3 prison officers in Frankland just the other week, and they were left fighting for their lives. We must protect these people who perform a vitally important job.
Peter.
But over the years, the job of prison officer has been downgraded, not only in terms of wages and pensions, but training, standards, and the amount of time people have got to fulfil that role for.
Peter, there was a meeting yesterday in the Ministry of Justice with the Prison Officers Association and the Justice Secretary, and it isn't Shabnam Mahmood's fault, but previously, a few years ago, prison officers were told they weren't allowed to have stab vests. Do you know why they weren't allowed to have stab vests? Have you heard about this?
It's utter nonsense, and it's to do with the optics.
Yeah.
Those who don't really know what they're talking about think that prison officers in stab vests would create a more confrontational atmosphere.
They're saying it could be intimidating for inmates. I mean, I don't know about you, Peter, but that sounds like one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard.
Hello, these people have broken the law, they're in prison, they're being punished. My thoughts are entirely with prison staff who need to be suitably protected. Of course, we want prisoners to be rehabilitated, but that's not going to hang on the fact as to whether a prison officer wears a stab vest or not. Give them the protection they need and do it now.
Absolutely correct. Peter Blexley, former Metropolitan Police Detective, thank you for joining me on Talk Drive today. Chris is in Manchester and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Chris, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm a retired cop. I've been out of the job 12 years, but I think the issue with shoplifting is the perception is you're not going to get caught. Now, one of the reasons you're not going to get caught, in the good old days, shoplifting was largely detected by professional store detectives and security officers who detained people at the scene together with the goods that they had stolen. Now, nowadays, a police officer attends a case of shoplifting, and more than likely, the store detective or the security guard will inform them that the person has left the shop, that they weren't allowed to detain them because in case they get injured, and given a fairly poorly produced package of evidence, usually a little bit of CCTV, and that's it. Now, in terms of proportionality, it's very difficult to invite someone to investigate a crime where essentially the victims, i.e. the store detective, has allowed the person to leave. Now, I understand the issue. I understand the issue of health and safety, etc. But realistically, I think the perception is that CCTV is the be-all and end-all, and I can tell you in reality it is not, because you produce a grainy image of a suspect and produce that to that suspect in interview, for instance, and that suspect says, that's not me, Gov. It's very hard to say that it is them. So I don't think things are quite cut and dried, and I think the criticism of the police in terms of investigating shoplifting is a little bit one-sided. Yeah,
and there's sometimes not, as you say, an awful lot to investigate. Should the individual stores be able to hold the people for longer? I mean, they're worried, of course, about, as you say, about presumably themselves being sued or wrongfully holding people or whatever. Why was it simpler years ago and it's not as simple now? Has the law changed in that regard, do you know, Chris? Or what's the... No, they always had a right to detain an individual on suspicion of an offence, and they retain that right. That hasn't changed. Okay. There's no issue with detaining them. So it's the stores themselves that have decided not to detain shoplifters somewhere along the way? Yes. Okay, well that's very, very interesting. Because generally speaking,
we used to have store detectives. Invariably, they used to be ladies, and they used to be of a certain age. And I can tell you from experience that they were excellent. They were very professional, never had an issue. All you see now are security guards with stab vests, looking at TV screens, and beyond that, they don't seem to do anything else. And I don't think it's acceptable to invite the police to investigate something when, particularly, quite often we're talking about very large amounts, people walking out the store with trolley loads of alcohol. And just being allowed to leave the store willy-nilly without so much as a buy your leave. Now, to me, that's not acceptable. If the store aren't capable or aren't willing to protect their own goods, I mean, if you or I left our front door open and somebody burgled the house, the insurance company would not pay out.
Yeah, it's a fair point, and maybe we need to be a bit more understanding of the police and where they're coming from. This one.
Well, I think so. I think they do get a lot of stick.
Okay, Chris, thanks for your thoughts there, Chris in Manchester. Just on the aspect of the phones and playing music on public transport, Gary says, I'm sure that you know that there is a golden rule in government: never introduce a new law before you first considered how you're going to enforce it. The transport operators can't even stop people getting onto trains and buses without tickets. How are they going to catch and fine passengers for playing music too loudly? Gary, it's a very fair point, and certainly I think about some of these new laws that the Conservatives put forward about stopping people smoking near pubs, for example. Well, you can't stop so many people smoking cannabis in our streets, so that's illegal as well. How are you going to enforce that? I suppose the point is that they should be enforced and it should be against the law. I think it is a clear example of antisocial behaviour when you're playing your music loudly. It's different if, something goes off or your phone rings or there's a blast of something for a few seconds and then you go, oh, sorry, I'll turn it down. But there are people who just play it with impunity, and it's really, really annoying. It's not the biggest thing in the world, but it is one of those things that happens just about every day, and it's one of those things that if people just stop playing their music loudly or their TV show or whatever on public transport, put in a pair of earphones, well, it would just make all our lives that little bit nicer, and it's a consideration thing for other people as well. Lots of views coming into the building. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk to Jonathan Gullis in a second about Nigel Farage vowing to create a minister for deportations. Do you think that's needed? Let us know your thoughts. Stay with us here on Talk.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything, because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms. What you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Jonathan Gullis is with us now. He's a former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party. He's also a Talk presenter and is going to be in this chair tomorrow night between 7 and 9. Great to have you on the show. Jonathan, how are you doing?
I'm good, mate. How are you keeping?
Yeah, very well, very well. Can I ask you, actually, there's a number of crime issues and immigration issues I want to talk to you about, but I know you're a former teacher as well, and I just wondered about this idea of a social media curfew for children. This is Peter Cardwell, the Technology Secretary, expressing concern over the harmful and addictive aspects of spending too much time online for under 16s, and he says that children could face a social media curfew similar to a TV watershed under new government plans. I'm just wondering if you think that will work and whether you think it's a good idea, Jonathan.
Well, I think, again, the issue with all these type of ideas is how you actually implement it, how you police the internet, I think is well beyond our real capabilities. It's one of those things that if you created it now, what safeguards should you put in place? I think that there should be a ban on social media being able to be accessed before the age of 16, and then if the platforms are allowing youngsters under that age onto it, then you levy the fines that you can under the Online Safety Act against them. And I mean hefty fines that we see in the US, for example, when tech giants or other companies have done wrong and not abided by the law of the land. And ultimately, we also need to have a ban on phone in schools. Not the current ban, like lots of schools claim, which is kids are meant to have their phones out of sight, but they're on their person. And believe you and me, they're using them, particularly in between lessons or at break and lunchtime. An actual ban where you hand the phone in at the start of the day and you get it back at the end of the day. So children can be children.
Do you think children need phones at any point of the school day?
No, not at all. I mean, when you have a teacher who wants to do anything with technology, there are computer suites in primary and secondary schools, laptops, a lot of them given out during the pandemic, and iPads as well to schools to particularly assist children who didn't necessarily have access to technology at home. So there is an abundance of technology already available. But ultimately and frankly, schools is about learning about knowledge. And what we want is teachers in the classroom imparting knowledge and giving kids the best opportunity to use that knowledge to get the best educational outcomes. Therefore, they can get the best job opportunities that come to them. It's without a doubt the biggest issue I faced as a head of year was smartphones being used, particularly out of school hours, but parents coming in to say that they were worried this would come into the school, and then spending my day trying to find out what had and had not been said and whether or not that was going to have repercussions within the school day, sometimes of which it did. And obviously that disrupts learning for others. That potentially could lead to students being removed from classrooms or even indeed
So this was often sort of bullying and exchanged words and problems and beef between students that had happened beyond the school gates that kind of wasn't your responsibility, but of course had an impact on how you were teaching and the relations between those students.
And absolutely, and it even made it hard for teachers as well, because ultimately there was always the fear that a teacher might be getting secretly recorded without knowing why or that type of thing, and that puts people off coming into the profession as well, you know. So I think it's really important that we have an honest conversation. Like I say, I'm sort of, it's naturally anti-conservative, I suppose, my position, if you think about it, meant to be sort of laissez-faire attitude. But actually, I think that smartphones are as dangerous as smoking and as alcohol, and we need to therefore be as rigid as we can about limiting access, particularly to younger people. I know now as a father to a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old, I'm being very strict about any screen time. And when they do get screen time, it is on certain applications designed to help them improve their phonics, improve their numeracy, not to just sit there and gormlessly watch TV.
Yeah, certainly. Nigel Farage says he wants to create a minister for deportations. Is this needed?
Well, I think there's a position called the Border Security Minister, which already exists and essentially kind of oversees that role. So I'm assuming what Nigel's getting at is a rebranding of that role. Now, I've got no particular issue with that. Every incoming government has a right to change the titles of their ministerial departments and ministers within them too. You know that, Peter, firsthand from your experience in government too. And I think that actually what Nigel's trying to say is that if reform were in government, that this is an expectation, that civil servants need to expect that this is going to happen. And sadly, particularly in this kind of area, and let's be honest, particularly if we had a reform government, the civil service, I suspect, are going to try and do everything they can to undermine any minister, much more than they ever did with the Conservatives when it comes to particularly deportation. So I suspect Nigel is trying to send a strong message that if reform come into power, this is going to happen, and we're not going to take any apologies for it. But of course, legislation is where it's going to be critical here, and it's going to come down to that question of the ECHR, which, to be fair to Nigel, he has consistently said he would withdraw from, and it's again something I've always advocated for as well, and I hope the Conservatives get into that place too.
It'll be interesting with the ECHR. I think that debate is going to come up again and again over the next few years. We have quite a number of crime stories around as well. 500,000 shoplifting offences recorded by police for the first time is sort of the main headline. And shoplifting, of course, is a huge scourge in so many small businesses. Why is it that the police can't get a grip of this, do you think, Jonathan?
Well, I think first of all, this goes back to being honest, and that when we were, as a Conservative Party in government, we did effectively allow the police to turn a blind eye, I think it was, to thefts of under £200 in terms of value. Now, I know the government always used to argue that wasn't the case, but ultimately the statistics don't lie with how regularly we were seeing stories of shoplifting and how little stores were actually reporting to the police, or when they did, police were simply just sending a crime reference number and not following up with that investigation. It comes back to this low-level crime again, where what we need to do is not have the police monitoring online activity or non-hate crime incidents. What they need to be doing is, even if it is for petty theft worth 50 quid, get these people in cuffs, get them locked up. If they are repeat offenders, and it goes to some of the Crush Crime campaign ideas, that these are predominantly people who will be committing hundreds of offences, they need to be kept in prison for a very long time. They are the ones causing the misery upon communities, upon local businesses, and if they were behind bars for a very long time after committing even 10 offences, let alone 100 and 200 in some cases, then I think we would see a dramatic fall in crime, because the overwhelming majority of people are law-abiding citizens. But those few scumbags, scroats and savages that cause a nightmare in our communities, they need to face the full wrath of the law.
And when they do, especially when young people go into young offenders institutions, we're now being told that pepper spray is going to be used in young offenders institutions because the level of assaults against staff are so incredibly high. Is that something you support?
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, doing that job must be incredibly difficult, and sadly is becoming what it appears increasingly dangerous. And anyone who wants to work, whether that be in our police, whether that be in our prison service, our fire service, ambulance service, they need to know that they've got protection as much as they can for the people they may come into contact with, particularly the prison service, where you are dealing with people who have literally broken the law and are serving time. And as we have seen with Young Offenders Institute, sadly, continues to be some sort of breeding ground for future lifelong criminals, rather than actually rehabilitating and turning people's lives around for the better. So at the end of the day, if this is going to make sure that people stay safe in doing their job, then so be it. It's actually upon the young people in those offenders institutes not to create a reason for why the pepper spray would need to be used. And of course you would hope that there would be safeguards in place, that if it were used, that obviously they would be looked at, and that ultimately it would be determined, I would like to think, 99.9% of the time that it was used absolutely correctly. And therefore we should always have the back of those prison officers who are doing, as I say, that increasingly dangerous and difficult job that many of us, quite frankly, wouldn't have the stomach to do.
Jonathan, lots of common sense spoken there. There'll be more. It's between 7 and 10 tomorrow night, of course, rather than 7 and 9. Usually on a Friday it's between 7 and 9 because Kev then has his What Just Happened programme. But of course he's not here, he's on holiday. So Jonathan Gullis will be with you for 3 full hours. Tomorrow night I will be handing over to you and I will see you in the studio then. Jonathan, looking forward to that. Thank you for your company today. That is Jonathan Gullis, who is the former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, and he is, of course, a talk presenter tomorrow night between 7 and 10, so you can hear all of what he has to say. Lots of people getting in touch. Lisa says, I was in Dunelm. A man ran out with a huge box in his arms. The staff told me they weren't going to challenge anyone, and there was no security. There's just no deterrent, says Lisa. And Keith in Forest says, they need to change the law. Steal anything over £100 and you should be charged with looting. Tried and jailed as a looter, says Keith. Lots more comments coming in. We'll take some calls soon as well. We're also going to talk to Alan Mendoza of the Henry Jackson Society, because what is going on in Ukraine is horrific. Of course, the UK has condemned the airstrikes on Kyiv. Also, Trump saying, Vladimir, stop. You can't really get more direct than that. Of course, Trump is a very direct person. And Zelensky, President Zelensky, cancelling part of his South African trip after the deadliest Russian attack. What is going to happen with that? Are they going to get to peace? And what effect will it have in the UK? Could we be sending peacekeeping troops there? We'll speak to Alan Mendoza in just a second here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much for your company this Thursday at lunchtime. You want to get your views on the air? Let me know what they are. 0344 499 1000. You might be interested in a report from the Henry Jackson Society, one of the think tanks in Westminster, that are saying that we should let in skilled Russians. This is to create a pro-Western Russian exile community. Would you be happy to see more Russian immigration to this country? 0344 499 1000. They're saying the European Union and the UK should create relocation incentives for Russian business elites, skilled workers and technology specialists willing to abandon Putin's system. We'll talk a bit more about what's happening in the region at the moment and what Trump's saying, and the effects, of course, on the people of Ukraine, of Russia, and in this country as well, whether we're going to be sending peacekeeping troops. But first, let's talk about this plan to let in skilled Russians with Alan Mendoza. Alan is the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Alan, just outline this plan and why you think it's a good idea. You're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Peter. Well, look, obviously the point of this is to weaken Russia's, if you like, industrious spine of skilled professionals who we could quite do with over here. And the point of this is, to make it as attractive as possible to attract high, sort of high-skilled workers. We're not talking about, sort of perhaps people at the lower end of the scale. We're talking about doctors, we're talking about business leaders, we're talking about industrialists, to break away from Putin's regime, weaken his country and strengthen ours by bringing their skills to use in the service of a free and democratic nation. And I think a lot of people in this country, have been interested in high-skilled immigration for a long time, not so interested in low-skilled immigration. And this is part of what this plan would, I think, enable to have happen.
It's still numbers, though. It's still people. It's still families, and not all the people in those families will be highly skilled migrants. It still adds to the number of migrants. Should we do this at the expense of other migration, and how would you stop migrants who you perhaps don't want, that are low-skilled and not from Russia?
Well, that's simply a case of making sure that you won't give visas to people who aren't, skilled in certain places. It's very easy to set a high skill quota. We've just not done it in this country. That's the problem. The problem has been we've opened the doors for everyone. That is where your problem lies in terms of numbers. The number of, if you look at high skilled professions, we're not about millions of people flooding in. It's a very small subset, but they're a key subset. They're the people who really do drive things on when it comes to, business, entrepreneurial skills, and also some of the very, kind of necessary vacancies we have in places like the healthcare system. Russian healthcare is actually pretty good, but you want the very best people here to have happen. But I'm certainly not remotely suggesting that we open the doors to every Russian coming in here. This is a very targeted move to get the very cream of the cream, as it were, and to also, in the same point in time, weaken a strategic enemy of ours by taking some of their best people.
How can you be sure that that would actually happen, and how can you be sure that those people are going to be totally signed up to a liberal, democratic, free society as we are in the UK, and not be people who perhaps support Putin's regime but say they don't?
Well, that'll be down to interviewing, won't it? It'll be down to the whole process. I mean, it is not simply a case you turn up in the UK, say, hi, I'm here, I'm a skilled Russian, in I come. There's going to be checks, obviously. There's going to be social media checks. There are going to be intelligence checks. And again, we're not talking about a large number of people. The system doesn't work brilliantly
at the moment, though, Alan, does it? I mean, you've quite a lot of faith in this system.
No, but again, it's down to numbers. I don't imagine that you're talking about more than a few thousand people here. That's the difference. So you can take the time to look at them very carefully, because this is a very, different approach. Qualifications can't be forward. There are things that you can very easily get to show who is high skilled. You do a proficiency test based on what industry they're coming in. They don't understand the basics of it. They're obviously not highly skilled. So I don't think this is actually beyond the wit and wisdom of British bureaucracy to actually devise a proper system for a very small number of people who could make a very big difference.
There are, of course, quite a number of properties, not least in London, that are owned by not just oligarchs, but just rich Russians in general. Would your plan sort some of that out with absentee landlords, for example, people buying up property who are just never there, who are perhaps laundering money, or perhaps just not in the country that they have a home in, and that's taking a home away from someone else? Is that perhaps part of this, or is that just a separate problem? Because a lot of those people necessarily, some of them are loyal to the Putin regime, and just some of them aren't.
Well, I don't think we're really talking necessarily about oligarchs in this level. I mean, that's the sort of person you're talking about there. I think we're talking here about skilled professionals.
Okay.
Now, they don't have the money to buy those kind of properties. So I think it's a separate problem we're talking about, a separate issue.
Sure. You've also talked about Europe retained potent leverage over Russia, regardless of Trump's efforts to broker a better relationship with Moscow. Your report says 258 billion of frozen Russian assets held in Belgium would go some way to financing the reconstruction of Ukraine. When we get to that point, that is, of course, an issue that should be looked at. Just in terms of getting to that point, where do you think things are at the moment, Alan? Because we have President Trump sending Vladimir Putin a message on Truth Social, the social media network, essentially saying, Vladimir, stop, saying he is not happy with deadly Russian strikes on Kyiv. We've also heard Trump say that he basically has a deal ready to go. Putin might go for it and might not, but Zelensky is in the way. This doesn't seem to be a particularly well-ordered peace negotiation. What do you think?
Well, it isn't, because, fundamentally it is a peace negotiation at the moment, which seems to be pressuring only one side, and that side is the Ukrainians. Although, as you just pointed out, President Trump has said, Putin's got to stop with his attacks. I mean, the whole point is that Putin's been able to continue his attacks for weeks while the negotiations are going on, claiming he wants peace while increasing the tempo and pace of war. So there's an obvious disconnect. What Trump should have said is immediately to Putin, if you're serious about peace, stop the fighting, and then we'll talk about where the end goes. I've never seen a situation where you move straight to the end point without a ceasefire first. Mm-hmm. Every side if you're serious about peace, you need to, end the fighting first. At that point, you can sit down and start negotiating. What we're getting at the moment, though, is Putin able to attack at will. He's able to kill civilians whenever he wants to, and there's no pressure being put on him to give any concessions up. All the pressure is going to Ukraine. That's not going to achieve a sustainable peace.
Is a blind eye being turned to some of these horrific airstrikes with the object of getting a deal done necessarily? Because, again, I go back to the point which I think we agree on in terms of the sequencing of this just not appearing to be correct and not being of help to the Ukrainian people who are being bombed, including those airstrikes last night.
Yeah, look, I think, as always, atrocities do have a momentum of their own when it comes to wars. Like, you can look at many different wars in history when a certain atrocity, the killing of civilians, in a certain number, has led to a dramatic transformation of international opinion. Mm-hmm. Now, Putin probably hasn't gone there yet to the level you would need. I refer, for example, to, if you remember the Srebrenica breadline massacre, things like that back in the Bosnian War, that made a massive impact. Yep. Of course, it changed internationally. Now, it only takes one such thing, Putin killing 50, 60 civilians rather than, say, 812. It's terrible to talk in those terms. I mean, 812 is disastrous. But it's the level of how this looks and acts, and you could see a big transformation. But certainly he's not been pressured by Trump to date to stop his attacks. If he had been, I'm pretty sure he'd have stopped it. That's the amazing thing. Trump's got a lot of power at his disposal here. And if he was serious about pushing Putin, I think Putin would have to give him something to show that Putin would stay in his good books. But right now, that's not been asked for. It's a mistake, in my view.
What do you think peace will look like in Ukraine? What is your prediction, and what would you like it to look like?
Well, I'd like it to look like the Russians retreat back to their border in 2014, and they acknowledge they did wrong. They paid for Ukrainian reconstruction, and that was that. That's not obviously what is likely to happen under the current circumstance. The best case scenario, and the one realistic, I think the Ukrainians understand this, is that they don't have to give away territory permanently in the sense of saying we are ceding territory. There may be some kind of deal worked out where some areas of Ukraine pre the war are administered by neutral forces or something of that kind, that there is going to be a determination of those areas along the line. But also, crucially, they are free to join NATO, they're free to join the European Union, and as well that any deal agreed will be underpinned not simply by European security guarantees, but crucially by the Americans. Because if that happens, then you have a chance of peace actually lasting. I think if you don't have that security guarantee, and if you have an unfair peace levied on Ukraine, firstly, it emboldens Putin if he's given what he wants, basically. It goes, well, I'll come back for some more a bit later. And equally, Ukraine will not be satisfied with that. How could you be if your territory had been given away unfairly to another party? You would have to obviously consciously try and get it back. And there's a great example of this. If you look in Europe, the constant fights between France and Germany from 1870 onwards, when the French ceded Alsace and Lorraine to Germany at the end of that war, the 1870 war, what happened? They spent the next 30, 40, 50 years, revanchism in mind, And when the Germans had to cede territory at the end of the First World War, what happened? It paved the way for Hitler, ultimately. So these things don't work if people feel they're unfair, ultimately. You need to have a fair settlement.
I wonder what our viewers and listeners think. 0344 499 1000. Let me just read you some of the messages we've received, Alan, and then maybe you could respond to them just in regard to the immigration idea. Mark says, call me a cynic if you want, but I reckon that if we opened our doors to Russians, we would just end up with the super criminals and the dregs of Russia. Alan Mendoza is living in a very fluffy bubble. Does he really think that Putin would allow the cream to leave Russia? Robin and Lynn in Chelmsford say, how can we be sure that their documentation is correct and it is Putin is he really going to let his best people go? Another person says, how naive is Mr. Mendoza? He will fill the country with spies. And just finally, Carl says, I saw a car with a Russian flag attached to the window with a message reading, stop NATO. Do we really want more imported issues? Your thoughts on all of that, Alan?
Well, it's not going to be the people who like Putin who are going to leave Russia. It's going to be the people who don't like Putin. There are plenty of them. They just don't necessarily have an escape route right now. The reality is that Putin has never actually tried to stop people leaving Russia. He doesn't mind them leaving, ultimately. It's not the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union stopped people leaving because they saw it as a weakness. Putin, if you were against him, he doesn't want you go, but as long as you stay out of politics, he's fine with it, basically, in that sort of setup. So I don't think we should be worried about pro-Putin people coming to the West. Again, these are not the oligarch class. These are not the people who've been backing his regime. These are ordinary Russians who happen to be professionals, who want to just have a better life and get out of this crazy situation they're in. I think, if push came to shove and they had the choice to live just as in the past, many Russians wanted to leave the Soviet Union, we were happy to support that process and idea in the past. We didn't think they'd all be spies. That's a very negative view. We thought, actually, you know what? These are people who want freedom. They actually want to buy into the West values. They're the people we're looking for. And I think we have enough ability to discern those people when it comes to work out. And again, I'm not talking about, hundreds of thousands of people. I'm speaking a small number of professionals who can very easily be, in my view, peer reviewed and assessed to make sure that the people who they say they are.
Alan, thank you. Thanks for your thoughts. Alan Mendoza there, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. What do you think of what he has said there? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Quite a lot of people getting in touch as well in regard to the shoplifting issue. The police have no shame, says Mick. Rob, talking about Jonathan Gullis, he says Jonathan Gullis talks the talk. However, he and the government, the Conservative government, were in power for 14 years and are to blame for the mess we're in now as a country, and to blame we've got this dreadful Starmer government. Hindsight is a marvellous thing, says Rob in London. Well, thank you for that. We'll take some calls and more of your messages after the break. Do give me a shout. 0344 499 1000.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms. What you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Gary is in Hampshire and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Gary, you have some thoughts on shoplifting. I understand you've seen this happening. What have you done?
Hi, Peter. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I'm quite passionate about this subject. I've stopped shoplifters multiple times in my local shops.
Good for you.
Yeah, but it's got to the point now where I've actually had arguments with store managers about what's going on, and he told me straight that they don't get involved anymore.
So hold on. So you're in the store, you're in the shop, you're just going about your business. Someone's lifting something, someone's committing a crime. You say, excuse me, sunshine, stop committing the crime. And the store manager says, don't get involved.
That's exactly what happened.
That's mad. That's completely mad.
I went to the security guy and said, that guy is about to leave with 2 bottles of, I think it was Jack Daniels or something.
Yeah.
and I don't even speak to him now in the store anymore. He's still there. And this has happened numerous times. I mean, the irony is, right, people are going through self-checkouts and getting regularly checked for shopping.
Yeah.
You know, they do these, and yet they're letting people... I called because you had a guy on earlier saying it's not totally the police's fault and that the shops have changed, and he's absolutely bang on, that guy. The shops now, I've even been in Boots where the girl stealing a bag full of stuff was having a massive argument with the manager. To be fair, he was okay, he'd stopped her, and I got involved, and because I was a member of the public, she dropped the bag and left.
Right,
but,
yeah.
But she was standing up for them. But there's loads of times I've chased people down when I was younger. But, I mean, it's got to a point where my wife had to tell me to stop getting involved because I'm not a young man anymore. And, you know, anything can happen these days. But
Gary, you're right. But at the same time, and your wife's right, and I support her, but at the same time, you know, you're just trying to do the right thing. You're trying to be a good citizen. And actually, you're being criticised for doing that, for being a good citizen, because if you see a crime being committed, you want to help, you want to stop people. I'm not saying everybody should be a have-a-go hero. I don't want to get into a physical fight with anybody because I'm going to lose. Let's face it, Gary, I'm a big softie. But, I mean, it's very, very straightforward to say, you're doing the wrong thing, you shouldn't do that. I was actually on the tube in London one time with a very good friend of mine, a number of friends actually. It was the night of, we went to see Chesney Hawkes, believe it or not, Gary, and a few friends were walking along in the tube, and my friend had the phone in her pocket, and someone a thief lifted the phone, and my friend turned around and said, "It's wrong to steal, give that back." And I think the guy was just so completely shocked by that he gave it back. And my friend did a really, really good thing. And if he hadn't done that, my friend would have lost her phone. She was on holiday in the UK. That would have been a huge, big thing for her to get her phone back. And it's people like you, Gary, and it's people like my friend Simon, who are actually doing the right thing and trying to bring some order to the crazy world that is around us. But it must be so disheartening, Gary, when a store manager says to you, "Oh, actually, no, back away. You know, don't get. It's more trouble than it's worth."
Yeah, it is frustrating because we're not have-a-go heroes. I'm just a normal bloke, right, who gets frustrated by this, and I'm not looking to get into a physical altercation. But luckily, I am a big lad. I'm 6'2", and so I will stand my ground. But of course, I'm getting older. I'm not a young man anymore. But it is frustrating watching these people just allow people, like the cost of stuff is going up in the stores because of this.
Yeah, and we're all paying the price for that.
Yeah, absolutely. But when the manager my local Waitrose, believe it or not. I know people are going to slaughter me for that, but it's Sainsbury's as well. But yeah. I mean, you know, the local Waitrose I go to, the security is a joke, honestly, right? And the store manager, when I complained about it properly, and I had a proper conversation. He was a nice guy, but he genuinely told me, look, I don't want my staff getting involved, and it's too much hassle and blah. Because I said, why don't you employ ex-military guys? Yeah. 2 of them guys here, like the old days, would stop any of this nonsense. Because once someone goes in once and knows it's that easy, it's like they're just telling everyone else, and it's a constant stream of people every day.
Well, it's like so many things, Gary. It's where is the deterrent? You know, if you're not going to get lifted, if you're not going to get fined, if you're not going to get sent to prison if you do it a number of times, if there's not going to be no force of the law, why on earth would people not do it? Because you're the one,
and times are hard at the moment, so I understand.
And I feel like you, Gary. I sometimes feel like a mug. The tax you pay, the bills you pay, water bills, energy bills going up. You see things in the shop that previously were £2, now they're £3.50, and you think, well, why is that? And part of it, as you correctly say, Gary, is the fact that people are shoplifting from those stores. I haven't done it, you haven't done it, but we're paying the price for it.
Yeah, 100%, 100%, and it's just not right. You know, and when I see something, I can't ignore it.
Yeah,
it's difficult. It's hard.
But it shouldn't be hard, and you shouldn't be chastised for being a good citizen, Gary. And I appreciate you being a good citizen. I appreciate everybody every viewer and listener to this program who does the right thing. And I wish you well, Gary. And like, I'm with your wife. I don't want you to be, in any physical danger, but it's absolutely fine. I have a friend who works in the shop. She's a shop assistant, and she saw somebody lifting some goods the other day and just said, "Excuse me, are you going to pay for that at the till?" And apparently they just dropped them and walked out. And even the goods were fine. They weren't damaged in any way. But there's so few people in shops that are actually doing that, Gary.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and I do feel for people. A lot of these people are on minimum wage, and you can't expect them to be stopping these. A lot of them are drug addicts and things, and I do understand that, but equally they should have, in the proper they should have proper protections in there for their clients.
And they should be looked after as well. Gary, great call. I agree with every single word you've said. Keep being, however you do it, and however your wife kind of permits you to do it, I suppose, keep being a good citizen, because you sound like a really good guy. Adam is in Sunderland and has given me a ring about this as well. 0344 499 1000. Adam, you've had some experience of this yourself.
Yeah, I was. Hi, Peter.
Hi there.
I love listening to Talk Radio and TV.
Thank you.
Last April, I was in my local Lidl store in Sunderland, and I went in there and I was just walking about with a basket. And it was obvious that this guy was going to nick this leaf blower that was about 70 quid.
Right. Yeah.
So I looked around and there's no staff, and then I looked towards the exit and there's no security. So as he went to leave the barrier, I grabbed him and we tussled, and he dropped the box and ran out the store. I went flying, and I ended up breaking my elbow.
Oh, goodness.
In 3 places.
Flipping heck.
And I got up, and obviously I had a lot of pain in my elbow, and that. And the store didn't even take my name. All they said was, "Thank you."
I mean, you could. I mean, I know you're not going to, Adam, but you could have a claim against them, and you could say, you failed to protect me, but actually you were protecting them. You were doing the right thing.
Yeah, Peter. They actually said, and it went to their legal department in the end, and they said I acted off my own back, and that was it. I ended up, out of work for about 3 months. And I'm still suffering from it. And
I'm really sorry to hear that, Adam, because you were doing the right thing. You were trying to stop a crime, and they apparently, from what you're telling me, just didn't back you up in any way.
No, in the end, I mean, all they offered me a £25 shopping voucher.
Oh, well, that's brilliant. It's a 25 quid shopping voucher. I mean, what a joke.
Yeah, well, if they don't care, why should anyone else? And I know that obviously they write theft out into their profits, but at the end of the day, it's still us as the consumers that end up paying for it.
Well, exactly. With that 25 quid leaf blower, 25 quid voucher, you couldn't even afford the leaf blower, Adam, even if you'd wanted one. Yeah. How are you feeling now? Are you feeling all right?
Well, I've still got problems with my elbow, but if I see something now, I just said, that bloke just walked out with a case of beer. Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
They're not interested in a slight.
But that's terrible. I mean, what do you think that says about our society, Adam? That people like you are treated so badly. People like the caller we had a minute ago, Gary, were treated so badly for just doing what I would argue is everybody's duty as a citizen, to try to, see something happening.
It's our civic duty. I think we do have a reason, but obviously, if there's no protection for us, then why? We'll end up as the victims, not the store.
Well, exactly, and the wrong people are being protected yet again. Adam, great call. Thank you for that, and I hope your elbow heals fully and you're back to 100% strength very, very soon. Paul has sent us a voice note on shoplifting. That's what Paul has to say.
I work in a big supermarket in Solihull. We have thousands and thousands of pounds stolen each year. It's my responsibility as a department manager to make sure our staff and colleagues go home safe. It's not their responsibility to try and stop a shoplifter where they're either going to get stabbed, beat up or maimed, and for me to have that conversation with their families to say, unfortunately, Sarah's not coming home today because she's been stabbed. We get no support really from the police at all. We've got burned off CCTV in the back, up to 30 discs that they don't come out to. And I think it's a fight that we're trying to fight on our own.
Very, very interesting one from Paul there. I'd love to hear from you again, Paul, if you fancy sending me another voice note in the next few minutes, because I'd love to hear from you again about whether there are any store detectives, whether there are security staff in your store. What do they do? Because I think it's probably quite reasonable, especially if you're a shop worker who, it isn't your job to do the security for the store, especially a large store like the one you work in. But I'd love to hear, is there anything on a day-to-day basis actually in place in regard to your store? Paul, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe you drop me another little voice note. I'd be very, very grateful to hear that. And if you're a shop owner or you're somebody who works in a shop, I'd love to hear from you, from your perspective. What all sides of this argument? Are the police doing their job? Are the store detectives doing their job? Are the people who are working in the shop, is it actually their job? What about the public as well? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about shoplifting more generally with Danny Shaw. He is a police and crime commentator, former advisor to the Home Secretary, and the headphone dodgers who play music on buses and trains.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, it's just gone 5 o'clock. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. There's loads to talk about this evening. Shoplifting is the big one you want to talk about. Lots of calls coming in. Keep them coming. 0344 499 1000. That is that 500,000 shoplifting offences have been recorded by the police for the first time. Our crime commentator Peter Blexley, former Metropolitan Police detective, says the number could be many more because so many of them just aren't reported. What's been your experience? We've spoken to Have a Go heroes. We've spoken to a guy who broke his arm trying to stop somebody thieving something from a shop, and he was offered a 25 quid voucher in recompense. What do you think about this? We're talking about 5,700 crimes last year going unsolved, and a big story from the Liberal Democrats. I agree with their policy, doesn't happen often. This is a call to fine headphone dodgers who play music on the bus, on the train, on public transport, those kids who play really loud games, older people who play really loud games. Put some headphones in. The device probably costs you 200 quid. Spend an extra £5 or a tenner and get a pair of headphones, for goodness sake. We'll have a sports update this hour as well. Make sure you get your points across to me. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call, or send me a voice note. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, you can send me a WhatsApp voice message, less than a minute please if you would, or you can give me a call, 0344 499 1000. Plenty to discuss here on Talk. Well, as I said, loads of messages coming in to Talk Drive, including from Phil Goodfellow, who says, I'm not sure having a go when a crime is being committed is a good idea, because you don't know whether the person you're trying to stop is carrying a 3-foot machete in his pants. Also, Angela says, I agree with the Liberal Democrats for once too on the headphone story. No earphones is just rude. However, best of luck actually tackling these people. And Steve says, my wife used to work for a big opticians chain. They would not have a security guard, as the cost of a guard was £28,000 a year. The store lost £20,000 a year in theft. They then put that cost onto us. Very, very interesting. We will debate all of that as time goes on. Just a couple of messages coming in, a couple of texts. Hi, police are not helping stores but can send 6 officers to arrest parents who dare to criticise their child's school online, says Leslie. Yeah, remember that interview with Maxie Allen before. I think there's perhaps more to come on that particular issue. Another text. Hi, Peter. I saw two people pinching 2 vacuum cleaners from Tesco, so called the store, give them the registration of the car. They escaped it. Well, good for you. That's a good citizen. I wonder if things ever moved or anything happened with that particularly. Mark says on a WhatsApp note, he says, hi Peter, many years ago when I stacked shelves at Safeway, we used to have a tannoy call where staff all went to the aisle and confronted people stealing. We even had people restrained and the police turned up. Not sure how this changed over the last 20 years, and the police do not care. Caterham was safer when we worked there, says Mark, who is in Caterham. Thank you for that. Lots of people are getting in touch. We're going to continue talking about that, including with Danny Shaw. He's a police and crime commentator, former advisor to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Danny, we have one of the ministers in the Home Office saying that this is an issue they're going to sort because they're putting more bobbies on the beat and there are 3,000 more police officers. This is Dame Diana Johnson, said the Labour government will not tolerate the criminality blighting our communities. That's why we're putting 3,000 more bobbies on the beat in neighbourhood rules this year, and under our leadership these crimes will receive the attention they deserve. Do you think that's right?
Well, I think it's right to have more police officers and community support officers in neighbourhoods. I absolutely support that policy. I think the idea is to have 13,000 deployed by the end of the Parliament 2028-2029. So that's a good policy to have, and I think it will help. It will make a difference. But are you going to tackle the problem of shoplifting by doing that? Are you going to stop it? Of course you're not. It requires more innovative ideas. I see the Met Police quite recently had a strategy where they were spraying commonly stolen goods with some kind of DNA marker, and they then followed up on that and they were able to trace the gangs and the goods. And what they found was that some goods were being stolen from sort of high street chain supermarkets and then being put to sale in sort of corner stores and so on at a lower price. So I think there are some solutions out there, working with the retailers to do that is certainly one thing, and getting more suspects behind bars or into court behind bars. The charge rate has actually gone up in the past year. It's around about 18 to 19% of shoplifting offences result in a suspect being charged. That's still very low, but it is higher than it was a year ago. So it's going in the right direction.
And what I'm hearing, Danny, and I'm not blaming you personally for this, of course, I'm just illustrating the point, which I know you know well as well. What I'm hearing from our viewers and listeners, and we've had some really interesting calls and messages about this, we're going to have more between now and 7 as well. What I'm hearing is really from the start to the end of this process, you've got people lifting the things off the shelves, trying to walk out of the store. We've got to have a few good citizens told don't intervene. We've got staff who are telling us we're told not to intervene. We've got a store sort of supervisor who's been in touch who said, I don't want my staff intervening because they might get stabbed or assaulted or something like that. We've got, you know, someone telling me earlier on that it used to be usually older women who were store detectives. Where have they gone? And also the police saying, well, actually, former police officer spoke to us earlier on and said, look, you can give us CCTV, but that's often not enough evidence, and sometimes the stores aren't keeping people there. It seems to me, even from what I've learned and talked about this in the last hour, that there are so many problems at every step along the way. And yes, the government and the policing services can do more. And they, you know, in fairness to Dame Diana Johnson, in fairness to Labour, they do appear to want to do more. But this is just such a huge problem. Even though the item stolen might only be a few pounds, it's more the principle of it, isn't it? It's such a complex problem, and at every stage it just seems that there are failings.
Yeah, I absolutely on board with that. I mean, the problem is it's become a bit of a trend, a bit of a pattern, a bit of a thing, and so what you're getting is people seeing that it can be done, and they're not going to be caught, they're not going to be stopped, and then other people trying it on as well. And some people understanding that if they just nick goods that, you know, aren't worth very much, there's absolutely no prospect of them being brought to book. And other people forming gangs and doing it in a more coordinated way. What I think the police have to do in each police force is to have a blitz, to have a strategy to focus on it for a week or two, to try and send out a strong message that they will clamp down on it. Because although that's not going to have you know, the effect of reducing it to zero, I think it will send out a message that they're taking it more seriously. So they may have to divert some resources from other types of crime in order to try and stop this, or at least stem this growing tide of shoplifting. What's interesting, I think, Peter, is that it seems to me that some of these crimes, and also snatch theft, this is theft from the person where someone comes along, nicks your phone, steals your wallet or purse, these crimes are going up, and it seems to me that that's offsetting the reduction that we're seeing in burglary and car crime, which have been on a sort of downward trend for quite a long time.
Are they perhaps more difficult because for the criminal, because we're in a situation where, of course, car security systems get more and more sophisticated as time goes on, as do security in homes and things. Actually snatching a phone out of someone's hand and then getting rid of it very quickly for some profit is perhaps an easier thing for the criminal to do, especially when you can go on the back of a moped or something like that.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. I mean, we're carrying around with us items worth hundreds of pounds, you know, in some cases probably £1,000 or more. We never used to do that.
Yeah.
If you go
and also they have our whole lives
years
on them as well, and if they can get into it in some way, they have our whole lives. There are banking details of everything. It's like a whole wallet or a whole sort of so many different documents. Danny, really interesting you talk about the blitz there and the blitz idea. I don't think it's that often that I've interviewed both you and Peter Blexley in the same programme that you're saying exactly the same thing, but Peter Blexley and you are saying the same thing, so that has brought a smile to my face anyway. 5,700 crimes unsolved every day last year, say the Liberal Democrats. I wonder what you make as well about the pepper spray story. This could well be used in young offenders institutions. Violence rising there, 14 times more likely to be assaulted in a young offenders institution if you're a guard than in a prison itself. We've had HMP Franklin, we've spoken about that in the last week and a half or so, housing some of the most dangerous criminals in our society. We know about the hot oil and the stabbings that happened there, but interestingly the pepper spray now being used in young offenders institutions. I wonder if that is a move you support and what you think it says about the levels of violence in young offenders institutions.
Well, the levels of violence overall in prisons is on the up. and particularly assaults and serious assaults on staff is going up, which reflects, I think, some of the issues at Franklin. That's a real concern, and it's, I think, positive that Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, has authorised a trial of tasers in some prisons. I think that's worth having a look at that to see whether that helps.
Are you not worried about, as someone I was speaking to the other day, Vanessa Freck, former prison governor, said that she's worried that sometimes the prisoners could maybe wrest those tasers away and actually use them maybe against the prison guards? Would you not be worried about that in regard to the personal safety aspect of that?
You need training and you need guidelines about when to use these devices. Certainly shouldn't be like the first option that you go to. I mean, my concern would be the same with Parva spray. This is the synthetic pepper spray. It's already available in most prisons, in most adult prisons. Not all of them, by the way, but I think in most of them they have it available for staff. And my concern about all these weapons is that it becomes the thing that you reach for first of all, rather than trying to de-escalate a violent confrontation or a difficult situation by talking prisoners down, by calming things down through the words you use, through your sort of mannerisms, your body language. Some people are really good at that, calming situations down. They'll instead reach for the Parva spray, reach for the taser as the first resort when it should be the last resort. That's my concern. But I do think that violence in some of these young offenders institutions has got so bad and involves young people who are so strong that I do think we need to equip our staff with more alternatives that they can use, and pepper spray is one of them.
Well, some of them even stronger than many of the adults as well in the adult offenders institutions. Listen, Danny, thank you. I appreciate that. That's Danny Shaw there. He's a police and crime commentator, former advisor to Yvette Cooper. Leslie has been in touch and says, hi Peter, why do supermarkets employ security guards if they just let the shoplifters walk out with the goods? I know Dan in Colchester has a view on this, and I know you know quite a lot about security guards right around the UK. Dan, are we giving them a hard rap today, or are we being too harsh on them?
Look, this is the issue we have. The public perspective of security is they're standing there when the thefts are taking place, clearly right under their nose, and there's that lack of action. And I can tell you now, being the head of the trade union for security in the UK, that they are just as frustrated as your callers.
Which is that trade union, Dan? What's the trade union's name?
Security Industry Federation.
Okay, and you're the head of that. So they're frustrated too. Why don't they step in and do something about it?
Because as soon as they do, they either get assaulted, which means time off work, and a lot of these security officers are self-employed, or they don't get the statutory sick pay, and also they get disciplined from their workplace. So
they get disciplined. Why do they get disciplined for doing what many people would say are their jobs? That's mad.
Because it goes against their assignment instructions. It goes against company policy. It goes against what the client wants. So if your client is...
This is crazy, Dan. This is crazy. It goes against what the client wants. They employ a security guard. What's the point of having a security guard who can't stop people shoplifting? That's one of the basic things.
We have that conversation every day, Peter, unfortunately. But my staff are every single day in disciplinary meetings with security workers around the UK because they have dared to stop a shoplifter.
Hold on. Sorry, I'm sure what you're saying is absolutely true, Dan. I'm not doubting it for a second. I'm just struggling to process it here. So your guys are actually, who are security guards, who are paid to be security guards, are trying to stop shoplifters, but it's against company policy in some of these supermarkets or businesses to actually stop shoplifters. That is crazy. Right. Why bother employing them in the first place if they can't do the job they're employed to do by the policy of the company?
Because it used to be years ago they were a physical deterrent. The fact that they were there. I mean, my background, I was a police officer for 20 years. I know what it's like on that side of the coin as well. Not being too stretched and not being able to attend what people see as a minor crime. So, look, we have the security guards there. They're employed, and they are there as a deterrent for someone to look at and go, do you know what, I'll think twice about this. Same as having a CCTV camera, people might think, I'll think twice about this. But the ones that are brazen, the ones that don't care, the ones that know the system and know that they're not going to get caught, are taking the items off the shelves, and our members have just got to watch them, because in 99% of the cases that we are dealing with, it goes against company policy to stop them.
mean, I just despair at this, Dan. I know you're dealing with this every day, but I mean, what kind of conversations are you having with these businesses? What kind of conversations are you having when you say, hold on a second, we'd really like to intervene, we'd really like to save you money, we'd really like to try to, and it doesn't have to be a physical assault, it doesn't have to be anything that is illegal or heavy-handed, simply a tap on the shoulder saying, excuse me sir, you're going to pay for that, or, you know, can you just leave that down and then walk out of the shop and we'll say no more about it, and then they put something down. I mean, that's the kind of thing that the businesses you're supplying service, your members are supplying services to, Dan, are saying, don't do that, it's too risky.
For the last 3 years, we've been having these conversations with service providers, with the clients, i.e. the supermarkets or the retailers, and there is no interest in having security officers actually apprehend these people. And that's because they're fearful of either the staff getting assaulted or the actual perpetrator being assaulted and then being liable for that. Now, these security officers do a 7-day course, most of them, which includes physical intervention and all sorts of legislation of what they should and shouldn't be doing. Now, if someone's acting within their roles and their law and legislation, and if they are actually doing the job that they have been trained to do, then there's no problem. There shouldn't be a problem with that whatsoever. But there is no appetite currently for security officers to get involved. And the ones that have got involved, because they're just sick of being kind of heckled by the public and filmed and put on YouTube or TikTok because they're standing there watching and being ridiculed, you know, when they do get involved, they find themselves up against charges, and we're in the meetings with them trying to convince that company not to actually sack this officer because what they were doing was something that's in the public interest.
Yeah. I mean, what's changed in the last 3 years, Dan? Why has this changed?
Peter, I despair like you. So I think it's got worse. It's not got better. It's this since COVID and since this epidemic of shoplifting that has occurred over the last few years. It just doesn't seem to be getting any better, and it doesn't matter how many times people scream from the rooftops and people come on your radio shows and talk common sense. That common sense isn't getting through to the right people.
Dan, I'm just astonished. Do you know what? I'm going to end the call there just because we've got to go to a break. But Dan, I want to have another conversation with you. If you just give your number to the producer, to Ryan or to Faith, I'd like to have a longer conversation with you off air to try and understand this a bit more. Is that okay if I give you a ring maybe tomorrow? Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd just like to have more of a conversation with you because I really want to properly understand this issue. It just sounds completely bats that this is the case, and that these security guards are being told by the actual organisations, by the retailers, don't intervene. I'd love to know a bit more about that. Maybe we'll have Dan on as a guest at some stage because I know he's part of that union. It is it just defies belief. Thank you to everybody who's been in touch. My daughter's partner was sacked from his job at a supermarket after stopping and holding a thief stealing alcohol. The world has gone mad, says Linda in West Yorkshire. Well, thank you for that, and that's just another example of what Dan was saying there. So thank you, Linda in West Yorkshire, and thank you to Caroline, who says, my son was a manager at Boots a few years ago. Shoplifting was rife, and it got to a point where it was too dangerous to stop or challenge lifters, as the drug addicts would threaten to stab staff with dirty needles. That is grim. Nick says, what an idiot Gary is, our caller from earlier. I don't think he's an idiot at all, Nick. Why get involved? Why risk getting knifed all for a bottle of whiskey? If the shops don't care and the police don't give a toss, why bother? The country is well beyond help. This person says, why not send shoplifters to prison in places like Thailand? They will want to go back. They will not want to go back again. Well, listen, I think our prisons are much more civilised than places in Thailand. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it isn't. Jules says, prison staff are not guards, we're officers. It's a bit like if you're a journalist, not a hack. Hashtag forgotten service. I'm happy to be called a hack, let me tell you, but I will call you an officer, a prison officer. As for Danny Shaw, he fancies coming in for a shift in the morning. Make sure that could be arranged. Typical people who know nothing, making policy other folks have to live with. Well, in fairness to Danny Shaw, he's not making policy, but he is reflecting on it. And final one from Becca before the break. He says, my son lasted 3 months as a prison officer. What he saw will haunt him forever. As a mum, I was proud of him doing it, but glad he handed his badge in. What's happening in Whitemore is shocking. Lots more to discuss on this. Lots of calls coming in. We will make time for them. And we'll talk about the story of the day for me, which is why headphone dodgers who play music on buses could be fined. It's a great idea. It's from the Liberal Democrats. I know I'm still trying to process this, just as I'm trying to process Dan's call. Stay with us here on Talk.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms. What you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, loads of calls and messages coming in about shoplifting. We will return to that, I promise you, very, very soon. But I want to talk now to Steve N. Allen, the comedian and broadcaster, about the Liberal Democrats. Yes, really, believe it or not, the Liberal Democrats have come up with a fantastic policy. It's not often I say that, but they have done this. This is a really, really good idea, and I fully support it. In fact, I wish they would go further. What they're going to do, or what they are proposing anyway, they're not actually going to do anything because they're not in government, but what they're proposing is fines of up to £1,000 for people who play music on public transport, who play music, without headphones. Steve, I don't know about you, but I often just absolutely despair. I'm sitting on the bus, I'm sitting on the tube, I'm sitting on the train, and somebody just blares out usually absolutely rubbish music. And, you just think, why on earth don't you just put a pair of headphones in?
Yeah, and you know what? We are living in a time, and young people don't know this. I'm on the old man rant straight away. Young people have headphones that we would have dreamed of when we were growing up. Yes. Headphones used to be these iron-based magnet, terrible things, spongy foam at the side of your head attached to your Walkman. They get knocked off all the time. The noise bleed was terrible. These days, they have like the neodymium fancy transition metals that we dreamed of back in the lanthanides and actinides. You don't know what kind of sound quality you've got available to you. And what do, young people? You play it out of the tin pot speaker on the side of your phone. I have no idea why. So their plan to charge people, fine them £1,000. Look, part of me, probably like the serious, real part of me, thinks there's more of I normally wouldn't want the states getting involved in what you can and can't
And £1,000
do,
seems a lot of money, but if you even said, we're going to fine you £50 or even £30 because you're playing your music out there, and you shouldn't be. And have you been in the position, Steve, where you say to someone, do you know what, this is the quiet carriage, or alternatively just, do you know what, would there be any chance you could put some headphones in? And occasionally some people do it, but I mean, I remember being in a train carriage one time, and I was knackered. I think I was coming back really late from Gatwick or something. I think I'd been home to Northern Ireland. And this guy was just blaring out this music, and I said, is there any chance you could put headphones in? He said, oh, we'll turn it down a bit. No,
wow.
Same problem.
Yeah. It's the quiet carriage, not the quieter carriage.
Exactly,
but,
correct.
I mean, to answer your question, have I ever done that? Well, I've rolled my eyes and tutted not too loud. Not that they'd hear it. They were playing music out of their phone. And that's the British way I interact with people.
Yes.
I like the £1,000, though. I think it has to be such a painfully large amount of money. Look, you need to make your peace with the fact that we live in a country that does not have, like, a sensible level of punishment. You can get more money for a defamation lawsuit than you do for having an arm chopped off at work. So let's just pretend that this is the way it should be. So yeah, littering will be 80 quid. Music that obviously doesn't leave a mark like littering will be £1,000. And I'm here for it. And as you say, it's never going to happen because it's Lib Dem. It's like a transfer in fantasy football. You know, sounds good, but it's never going to become an actual thing. And is this just the Lib Dems doing something to get in the news? What? From log flume loving Ed Davey? Do you think they'd do something just to get in the news? Yes. And
it's hard to believe, but I think occasionally politicians do publicity stunts. Although this story, in fairness, there is a bus services bill going through Parliament, and Lisa Smart, the Liberal Democrat Home Affairs spokesperson, I'm fairly sure she's a woman, so I'm going to call her the spokeswoman, said far too many people dread their daily commute because of the blight of antisocial behaviour, and headphone dodgers playing loud music on buses and trains are some of the worst offenders.
Yeah. And look, there's already a law in place which means you can't play music deliberately out loud in stations to try and upset people. And they're just wanting to add some definition to it, saying that a phone counts as that. You're using technology to play a sound, an annoying sound. You're right, the music is always annoying. It's never been the Spice Girls every time it's happened to me. So whatever it's annoying, yeah, they're almost just clarifying things. But as you say, it's not even about whether it becomes actual law. It's the Lib Dems. Maybe it gets them in the news. But it also gives us a day when you can just feel justified in your complaints. Every single time you get on public transport and you're annoyed by something, I'd almost be willing to pay £1,000 for this news story to exist, just so I can feel that it's right, that it's not just me getting old and grumpy. It is annoying when people play sounds. Also, if you've got a speakerphone, don't put it on speakerphone and then still hold the phone to your head.
Yeah, or do that thing where you talk with the phone in front of you. No, I know what you mean. I think these people really, Steve, what I think they need to do is show us perhaps...
Show us what? No.
Give a little respect to me and indeed to Steve.
Yeah.
That's what I would argue.
I would have done that with my headphones in because I'm polite.
Yes, if I played that on the tube on the way home, there would be people who would think I was not respecting them. Well, Steve, thank you for your thoughts. That's Steve N. Allen there, comedian and broadcaster. What do you think about this? Should headphone dodgers be fined? I certainly will be attaching my Bluetooth. Do you know what? I have these Bluetooth headphones, little earphones. They're really good, and they're 20 quid. And the phone, I can't remember how much the phone was, but it was a lot more than 20 quid anyway. And I just think if these people, you know, if you have this phone, it costs often a lot more than my phone. Mine's a really old iPhone 10, not even worth being snatched, not even worth stealing. If you can just put in the little Bluetooth headphones, or even just attach the headphones to them, it just makes such a difference. Lots of people getting in touch. Rachel says, really interesting show today. I'm so with you on this idea about finding people without headphones. I'm glad to hear other people getting annoyed about this. I thought maybe I was turning grumpy in my 50s. Rachel, I'm 40 now, but in my 30s, believe me, well, I was pretty grumpy my whole life, but I was particularly grumpy about that. John in Rugby says, a couple of months ago I was on a bus when two young girls got on and started to play loud music. The driver quickly told them to turn it off as the bus company didn't have a licence for it. Fair play to them. They complied and turned it off, says John in Rugby. Chrissy says, it's a wonder why there's an epidemic of shoplifting. If nobody is challenged, then it's a green light for shoplifters. Crazy, idiotic, rules. And Phil says putting more policemen, not women, on the beat will only have a positive effect. Big if the new recruits are not more lefty, snowflake, DEI, societal outcast, ex-armed forces types, please. Great show. Please keep up the good work. Hi, the Lib Dems want a ban on loud music on transport. Can we put a ban on ridiculous MPs riding hobby horses and falling off jet skis? It really annoys me, says Leslie. Well, there we are. Lots more opinions coming your way in just a few minutes here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots of people getting in touch, including Les on Twitter, who says, why don't the likes of Tesco have G4S prisoner vans to place thieves in, then transport them to their massive recycling centre near Livingston in Scotland, where they can be made to work 12-hour shifts unpacking rotten meat and food products until they pay back their debt. Well, Les, that's one thought. Thank you to the person, Barry Still, who has sent me in an article from a few years ago, actually, from a newspaper, saying that the technology apparently is in development or has been invented, which is in regard to blocking a signal, essentially. Blocking, this is the sound of music echoing from a fellow passenger's earphones, can be a major frustration in public transport. Now a firm has patented technology that could jam other people's phones and enforce quiet on trains, tube carriages and buses. Cubic Corporation, who developed London's Oyster cards, is working on a system that would limit hardware on other people's phones to force them into a restricted mode. Well, that was from 4 years ago. It doesn't seem to have happened yet, but anything that can keep the noise down on public transport, big fan of that, I must say. Lenny's been in touch about this idea of an immigration enforcement minister, a minister for deportations. Lenny says, I believe we need a minister who will do what the people want. Starmer and Labour cannot be trusted with anything good for the indigenous people of this country. Lots of people in touch on text as well. Dan and Kent says the idea of allowing Russian citizens into our country is like a carbon copy of Operation Paperclip, where the US brought German scientists and rocket engineers to America after the Second World War. It's a great idea if they can be trusted. Vince says, no one wants more immigration to the UK. What do these pointless think tanks think we do? As for needing skilled workers, how about sorting out the education system so we have them now instead of dumbing down education? Then you wouldn't need skilled workers from other countries. You can train your own. That's the point of education in the first place. James says, why would a skilled professional want to leave Russia and come here? Their quality of life and cost of living would go up massively. And Peter says, I found it astounding that we pulled Russian children out of our best schools as a reaction to the war in Ukraine. Surely it is better to educate those children with British values and our British ways, producing future allies. Lots and lots and lots on shoplifting. Let's go to Paul in Preston about this. Paul, what's your perspective on this? You're very welcome to the programme today.
Thank you. I appreciate you listening to me.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I spent 22 years in the private security sector.
You must know all about this then.
To give you some background. So yeah. I was in from 98 onwards, pre-licensing and then up to date when I left the industry about 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
The problem with the whole problem with crime and shoplifting and things like that when it comes to retail outlets and shops and things like that is you've got a combination of issues that have occurred. One of your previous callers mentioned about getting ex-military and doing it. The industry was full of ex-military. I've worked with ex-prison officers, ex-army, ex-navy, etc., etc. To cut this down very, very simply, you've got the SIA, the Security Industry Authority. Mm-hmm. And when that was introduced back in early 2000s, basically what you did was put a dog collar on security officers. So all those days of gripping somebody and going, "Oh, get out," or you're going out in an ambulance is gone.
Yeah.
If they do anything, they can lose their licenses. If somebody doesn't like what they see, they can lose their licenses.
Right.
On top of that, you have another problem, which is retail outlets, shopping centres, etc., etc. They don't want the adverse publicity. They don't need the hassle it causes detaining somebody. The image that these places want to project is a place of safety and calm and what have you, especially with shopping centres, which I spent a lot of time in.
Yes.
And it's not, for them, it's not great for security officers to roll around on the floor, grappling these people or chucking them out. And obviously, if everybody gets the mobile phones out then and videos it, and it's all over YouTube, and again, adverse publicity. The third layer to this problem is that you have a police system that basically says, don't do anything that's going to get you in trouble. So we detain somebody, for instance, we call for police assistance. It could take an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours for them to turn up. When they do finally turn up, they'll go, right, say you're sorry. What? Say you're sorry and I'll let you go.
Right, yeah.
Sorry. Myself and my colleagues have to wrestle this person down because they were very violent. And the response you're giving me is, what? I've wasted my time, my effort to do this. I've put my own licence at risk to do this. And the response from the police is, we haven't really got the time to do this. I mean, a lot of the time you would call for police assistance and it would be, there's nobody available.
Yeah.
Well, there's a full-blown riot going on here. We've got 3 or 4 lads we've detained for shoplifting at, say, HMV for sake of an argument, and they don't turn up.
I mean, that must just be so dispiriting if you're someone who's doing the right thing, doing what you're meant to do in your job, and you need the next part of the process to work, and it just doesn't work.
No, I mean, like I said, not to put too fine a point on it. I mean, I could go on for hours and hours moaning and complaining, but it's not just moaning and complaining. They're valid complaints, they're valid issues that just never get addressed. But you also have a breed of shop managers. So if you take the individual security officer that looks after a large retail outlet, I looked after Sainsbury's on my own, and it was one of the biggest large format stores. I got hit by Liverpool gangs pretty much every night. We were losing tens of thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
To offset that, if you take store detectives, I'd say a store detective probably once every 3 to 4 months.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And the store detectives I got were next to useless.
Right.
Being honest, I'm not taking a dump on anybody that's a store detective.
No, but why did things change? Why was it fine at one stage and then it changed? Is it the actions of the SIA, you say? Or just explain that to me a little bit, because clearly something has changed in the last few years.
Yes, right. So I joined the business in late 1998, so pre-licensing days. And in those days, most of the people that joined the private security services were ex-police, ex-military. We had clear mandates, clear guidelines, which were run at that time by a company called a regulatory body called CITO, CITO. You've got some people who had questionable backgrounds, but the job got done. And if you saw a security officer, most people would go, I'm not tangling with them.
Yeah.
Then what happened was, to my understanding, now obviously you could probably research this better than I can, but I was told that when the SIA was formed, it was a defunct government body that was based at Liverpool, and instead of closing the department, they decided to create the Security Industry Authority as a regulatory body to the industry. We got promised all sorts of things like, will you be classed as professionals now? You'll have to have a professional licence, which costs us an arm and a leg to get your hands on in the first place. So £235 just to get the licence, plus another £500 or £600 worth of training on top of it. And I believe it's been changed again since I left, because my brother still works in it, and it's got even worse. Then you had a flurry of government people in job centres going, well, we'll give people SIA licences and then they can go work. That'll get rid of our jobless figures. So we ended up with what we used to call jacket fillers, people who had licences that were just chucked on jobs. They were useless. They couldn't do the job. They didn't really want to do the job. But you put a badge on them and you give them a high-vis jacket and tell them to go stand over there, and that's pretty much all they're good for. So all the good professional lads, and quite a few that I knew who were ex-military but had run-ins with the police, ended up being refused licences. So perfectly qualified, perfectly capable people couldn't get licences.
And we heard a bit from Dan earlier, who's from the Security Industry Federation, and he was telling us that often the retailers don't want the security guards to actually apprehend people. They want them, it's against some of those companies and some of those retailers' policies for people to actually apprehend, or even just tap people on the shoulder and say, excuse me, sir or madam, are you going to pay for that? I mean, that's just crazy.
It's crazy on the grounds that, like I said, for a lot of retail outlets now, it's all about image, and what they don't want is adverse image representation. So you end up with a situation where they just want visual deterrence. So you end up with a security officer standing there who might look the part, but he or she will never get involved. And I've seen it time and time again. Part of the reason why I left the industry was just down to the fact that I'm just sick to the back teeth of it. You know, I mean, all tiers of criminal activity and all tiers of activity that even are just nuisance. I mean, I don't know if you heard of these auditors, these YouTube auditors that used to go around causing problems for the police and private security people, going around just basically antagonising you.
Right.
And you just think, why am I doing this job?
Yeah, well, I totally understand that, and I totally get that frustration, Paul. And actually, do you know what? I think we need to do more on this. I think we need to get deeper into this. We can't do it now. And I'm just going to end the call now, Paul, if that's okay. But my producer Ryan is just going to have a quick chat with you, because I think we need to do more on this. I think we need to understand this issue better than we do as a station and actually as a society. So Ryan's going to have a quick chat with you. We're thinking of moving things in a slightly different direction, perhaps returning to this subject, because what Dan and what Paul and actually what Chris said earlier, a number of other people as well, have said to me today really has shocked me. It genuinely shocked me on this. Claire is in the Whirl and wants to have a chat about this as well. Claire, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say on this?
Hi, Peter. You're getting a grumpy old man, Peter. You need to join the grumpy old men panel.
Right, me. Okay.
Go get yourself a pair of ear defenders when you get on the train.
Don't you find it annoying, Claire? Don't you find it annoying?
I don't travel. I travel on the bus a lot. It doesn't seem to be any problem around where I am.
Oh right, okay. Maybe they're just scared of you, Claire. Maybe they just see you getting on the bus and they think, well, not mess with Claire. We'll put our earphones in.
I'll be the one playing the loud music.
What would you play, Claire? What would you like everybody on the bus to hear? What would your track of choice be?
Something with a beat, a bit of a beat. That'll do me.
I tell you something. I got into I don't often take Ubers, but I got into an Uber earlier today, and they had a certain broadcaster who shall remain nameless was on the radio at the time. Not someone who works for this company, it must be said. Works for another company and had that broadcaster on. It was around lunchtime, shall we say? And I said, right. Can we hear something else? And the driver said, what would you like to hear? I said, drum and bass, rap music, silence, hard FM, no matter what you want, just not that particular broadcaster. Anyway, Claire, you've given me a ring about shoplifting. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, really, I mean, I have rang you about shoplifting before, but I kind of rang you early on before. I think you spoke to the first guy. Was it Danny?
Yes, Danny Shaw.
He was sort of have a go, tackle, and he was talking about. I think it's all been said really, but the way that I feel is that these have a go heroes. I mean, the world has changed. We've got knife crime. I mean, these people that are taking, that are shoplifting, in a big way, they're going to be serious and they're going to be carrying knives, machete, whatever. And I don't really think that it's worth people being killed, to be honest. And not even security guards. I feel that security guards are there for a purpose, as a deterrent. And a lot of people who aren't really, seriously taking vast amounts, like, a lot of them do, because they sort of steal to order.
Yeah.
I know it's wrong. I'm not condoning it, but I do think that, people shouldn't be losing their lives.
No, certainly, and you don't want to, and you don't. I mean, we talked to that man earlier who broke his arm trying to stop someone stealing something, but at the same time, if you see something happening that shouldn't be happening, a lot of people's instinct and a lot of right-thinking people's instinct is to say, actually, no, this shouldn't be happening. How can I help?
Yeah, but that is unfortunately that is what. When he was saying that, I was thinking, well, he's put himself in that position. He hasn't asked for stuff, to do that.
I know, but it's a sad thing nonetheless, Claire, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Yeah, and I mean, it is good that people are concerned, but I just think that now the world has changed, and it's not like the old-fashioned type of shoplifters. People carry knives willy-nilly. I mean, kids carry knives.
Yeah, no, I know, and it's
people are going to be killed just over food. At the end of the day, I know the prices rise and all the rest of it, but at the end of the day, I think that people's safety should be paramount, and especially the security guards as well. Can you imagine their families?
Well, look, it's a dangerous job, but there has to be some sort of deterrent there. It's a really interesting debate. We're going to keep it going. Lots more people want to get in. Maybe you're one of them. 0344 499 1000. Quite a number of people as well on the Liberal Democrats policy as well. Bridget says, goodness me, Dopey Davy has had a good idea. He must have had a bang to the head on one of his childish jaunts, perhaps jumping fences and wooden horses. He's a complete idiot, says Bridget. I don't think he's a complete idiot. I think this is a good idea. This person says, who is going to enforce this fine then? Ticket inspectors? You hardly see them. Every day they let people run barriers without paying. You really think they will bother fining people for music? And even if they do, they'll probably get a mouthful of abuse, punched or stabbed. Graham says, forget fining people playing music without headphones on buses. They should just be tasered, says Graham and Bushy. I think that might be a little bit harsh. Mike in Sussex says, most people on the train don't even have a ticket, which isn't enforced. The fine for music is ridiculous and will never happen. And Jay says, speakerphone users need to rediscover shame, a radical lack of self-awareness. Fine them £600 minimum, says Jay. Right then, what do you think about all of this? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We'll have a sport update next. We'll take a load more of your calls as well between now and 7 o'clock. Stay with us.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms. What you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Plenty more on shoplifting coming your way, but now it is time for the
Sport Summary on Talk.
Ian Danter is with us. He's a Talk Sport commentator. Good evening to you, Ian. Big news in football this morning as Jamie Vardy announced he's leaving Leicester City after 13 seasons. Relegation aside this season, he's had quite an incredible career with them, hasn't he?
Oh, yeah. He's so close to 500 appearances. I don't think he'll get there, but he's got a chance to get 200 goals for the club before he hands his blue shirt in. He's on 198 with a few games to go, so he should, in theory, get there. But yeah, 13 years of quite brilliant service. He's won trophies. He hasn't had to go anywhere else to win league titles or FA Cups or participate in European competition. He's been a pest for centre-halves for 13 years. I actually remember, Peter, watching very early on in his Leicester career when they were a Premier League side, but they were struggling against the drop when Nigel Pearson was their manager. And I went to see a 0-0 draw with Hull City that ultimately was good enough to keep Leicester up. And although Vardy didn't score that day, it really struck me just how hard he worked for the team. And that's kind of characterised his entire time at the club. So he has been described by others as Leicester's greatest ever player. And fair play to him. He's put one hell of a shift in for his club. And I would have loved to have seen him stay on playing for his country a little longer. But he felt that there were other people in front of him, so he elected to retire.
Over in Newcastle, though, good news for them. Their manager, Eddie Howe, back from sickness. No doubt they'll be pleased to have him back in the dugout.
Yes, they've kept the same team for the last 2 or 3 Premier League games, which has worked in some instances, but they got beaten heavily by Aston Villa. Eddie Howe's been suffering from pneumonia, so this is something that you can't take lightly. You have to make sure he's 100% before he can come back to work and be back alongside his pal Jason Tindall. So it's great to hear that he's fighting fit and back at his desk at the Newcastle training ground. What a season he's had, winning the Carabao Cup, winning Newcastle's first major trophy in more than a generation. He's got so much credit in the bank there, Peter, that he could lose the next 5 games and it wouldn't change fans' opinion of him one jot.
Well, that's a nice position to be in. Let's turn to boxing now. It's a massive night for boxing. This Saturday, the family feud between the Bens and the Eubanks is renewed. Even I remember it the first time round. Is this fight as big as the one in the 90s when their fathers faced off?
It's slightly different to me. I'm no boxing aficionado, Peter, but Ben and Eubank were always fighting at the same weight, the sort of middleweight, super middleweight. But with Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn, there is a weight disparity, so one boxer has to adjust his weight so that it becomes a fair fight, effectively. Chris Eubank slapped an egg into the head of Conor Benn at one of the pre-fight press conferences a couple of months ago. That generated some headlines. This was originally scheduled to happen back in 2022 before Conor Benn had a drugs test which went against him, which he has continuously pled innocence about, that he was not guilty of any drug violations. So there's so many strands to this fight. But yeah, you go back to Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank Sr. and the scraps they had in the 90s. Apparently Chris Sr. is not going to be at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Saturday. He does not want to be part of this particular circus. It is going to be live on talkSPORT. We've got the rights to do it. That was only confirmed a couple of days ago. So it'll be a big old night on talkSPORT, and the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is sold out. I think Eubank will have too much for Conor Benn because of the slight weight advantage, but certainly they've both got motivation to knock the other one out.
Just speaking about things that are on the talkSPORT network, tonight you're going to be commentating on Premier League darts for talkSPORT 2. Can anybody stop Luke Littler in Liverpool tonight, do you think?
Well, Stephen Bunting in his hometown of Liverpool, which we're bringing you tonight, has a chance of getting himself further up the table. There are 8 players in the Premier League, and the top 4 only will qualify for the final at the O2 in London at the end of May. And Stephen Bunting, the hometown hero from St Helens, he'll get a massive ovation when he comes on tonight to play his game. But he's got some points to catch up. Luke Littler is away and clear at the top of the standings, and he's almost certain to be in the final. Ditto Luke Humphries, the world number 1. But then it's really between the other 6, Peter, to decide who gets the other 2 spots for the finals. And if Stephen Bunting continues play the way he has lately, winning titles on the European Tour, then he could reel in those players above him and make it a really tight old scrap over the next few weeks.
I'm going to be honest with you, Ian. I was sceptical about darts previously. It wasn't really my sport. It wasn't really something that I particularly enjoyed. And then Luke Littler came along, and I just did something of a 180.
The Littler effect is quite extraordinary. What it's done for the purchase of darts, for darts shops. The Luke Littler darts, there are 3 different grades of Luke Littler darts you can buy, professional and more sort of basic.
Yeah.
But whenever the dart shops get them in stock, Peter, they sell out instantly.
He's a superstar. He's a superstar.
It's incredible what he's done for the sport, and it's only just beginning.
Enjoy it tonight, Ian. As Ian Danter there, talkSPORT commentator, he will be on talkSPORT 2 tonight, commentating on the Premier League darts. Luke Littler, of course, taking part in that. We're going to talk to his former number 10 advisor, Tim Montgomery, in just a few minutes about all the stories that we're talking about today. Nigel Farage vowing to create a minister for deportations. Is that needed? And also Harry and Meghan calling for stronger social media guidance, and the government considering a social media curfew for children. Will Geddes is going to join us in that in the next hour. Loads of people want to get on shoplifting. I'll put as many of those calls on as we can. If you want to add your voice to this debate, you know the number by now, 0344 499 1000. Use the break to get your call in.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. I'm here between now and 7 o'clock. Loads to discuss, including the fact that 500,000 shoplifting offences have been recorded by the police for the first time. Loads of people want to talk about this. Maybe you're one of them. Give me a shout, 0344 499 1000. We'll also talk about Nigel Farage vowing to create a minister for deportations to boot out foreign criminals. Is that something you would support? And Harry and Meghan calling for stronger social media guidelines and rules as the government is considering a social media curfew for children. Would that work? Let me know your thoughts, as well as the Liberal Democrats' plan, a policy I can actually get on board with, that they have to make sure that people use earphones rather than blasting out their music from their devices or games or whatever. Lots to discuss between now and 7, 0344 499 1000. You can text me at 72222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember the main number does three things. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, you can send me a WhatsApp voice note, less than a minute please, and we'll play it out, or you can give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. And we have a self-confessed shoplifter in the studio for you next. Stay with us here on Talk. Now, how many former number 10 advisors do you think are shoplifters? Tim Montgomery is with me. Now, in fairness to Tim, tell me the story of your shoplifting today.
Well, I am absent-minded in all sorts of ways. And anyway, I picked up a baguette from Pret.
The sandwich shop.
The sandwich shop today. And as I was walking along eating it, which probably is an offence in itself, walking along eating, I thought, did I pay for this? And I checked my bank, because I don't use cash, and looked at my app, and I hadn't paid for it.
Right.
And this is going to happen to me one day. On this occasion, I went back.
So you went back into
I went back a little bit later.
You fessed up.
And I paid for it, which in itself was quite a performance, actually.
What did they do? How did they react when you said that?
I said, I forgot to pay for this earlier. And I actually they still had a version of what I bought.
Right.
And they said, well, I don't know. And they had to consult their manager. Eventually, they agreed to scan it and put it back on the shelf. But it took a little while. But
yes. Well, I had sort of one of those when I was sitting at an airport. I think it was Gatwick. I was going to see my parents in Northern Ireland, and there was a fire alarm. I'd eaten some food at a little cafe, and there was a fire alarm, and we all went away. And then the flight was called, and I couldn't go back, and the fire alarm was happening. So I rang them up a couple of weeks later and said, "Listen, I'm really sorry. I probably owe you, a few pounds for this." And they just said, "Look, we can't charge you. We don't know. There's no record of this. There was a fire alarm. Everybody who was there won't have been charged for what it was." So those are two, I think, honest examples. But what we're talking about now is
one day it's going to happen to me, though, because I'm sure I realised today. I wonder how often I've left a shop without paying.
Yeah, well,
I'm genuinely worried about it. I find it quite frightening, actually.
Well, there are people who do that.
You'll visit me in prison if it happens, will you?
I will, of course. I'll bake a sort of one of those files into a big cake for you. The trick I found in the past is to bake the cake first, run the bake, and then not. Okay. Yeah, you know what I mean. Anyway, on a more serious note, 500,000 shoplifting offences recorded by the police for the first time. This comes as over 5,700 crimes went unsolved every day for the last year. We've had a fascinating discussion this afternoon, Tim, in regard to the people the security guards who are often told don't intervene because it's against the policy of that shop. The government's saying they're putting 3,000 more bobbies on the beat to deal with this. But it does seem that this kind of what some people would see as low-level crime, it certainly isn't low-level to people who are affected by it, and we're all paying the price. I mean, my food at the cafe, your baguette, it all goes up because of people shoplifting all the time.
Well, actually, I'm very interested in this subject, not just because I'm vulnerable potentially to it, but I talked to the manager in my local Tesco recently, and he said, this was probably a conversation about a year or so ago, but he said he'd noticed a difference between the people who were stealing, and it had gone from sort of younger people stealing electronic goods or other goods that they tagged to actually often young mums stealing chicken. And food. And so I'm not defending it in any way. No, of course, but it tells a story. There's a cost of living dimension to this as well.
Yes.
And then you kind of think, well, Tesco, they can cope with it. But, just down the road, there's Charlie's, a little shop I use all the time, and they have a real problem. And it's, goods are being stolen, particularly after school, at quite a rate. And, this is a small trader. who's already, you know, up against a whole range of cost pressures, etc. And it's not a victimless crime. This is a person who may not be there for much longer if he continues to lose as much money through shoplifting as he currently is. So it's a real problem, and I understand why people on the edge might feel, you know, need to steal the chicken. A mum who can't afford to, well, says, you know, perhaps because of budgeting or whatever reasons, can't afford to put food on the table of their family. But it actually is not a victimless crime. The real independent traders who perhaps are struggling just as much, they also are really suffering from this crime wave, and it is a crime wave.
It certainly is. Tim, we see 5,700 crimes unsolved every day last year. Has the government got a grip on crime? Does it care about crime? Does it understand what it is like to be a victim of crime?
Well, I often think, you know, we have an understandable focus on immigration, and I think, you know, immigration is out of control into this country. But actually, I have thought over recent years we really have neglected crime, which of course is the other big responsibility of the Home Office. And most countries in the world do actually have a separate borders department. They have a separate, and it's a particular discipline to look after your borders, to deport people, to control immigration. And I think that the problem is you have a Whitehall reorganisation and it moves the attention of the civil servants and the people working it for a year or so. But actually, we should have a much more dedicated crime-fighting ministry in this country, looking at policing, looking at penalties. And at the moment, I'm afraid the Home Office is just a department that's failing in its two huge tasks.
The Liberal Democrats are saying that we should scrap police and crime commissioners, use the money to go into officers. Do you think police and crime commissioners serve a purpose? Do you think they're a worthwhile thing? Okay.
They were worth trying, but I don't think they've really worked. Do you know who your police and crime commissioner is?
Well, I live in London, so
it's a bit different. Yeah,
Sir Sadiq.
Sir Sadiq, yes. Yeah, I'm glad you call him by his appropriate name.
Do you know who yours is?
I kind of do. I know it's a Conservative in Wiltshire, but I don't know the name.
Right, yeah, indeed. Well, we've certainly spoken to some of them previously, but whether they actually do a good job or not is I suppose...
They may do a good job, but I don't think, you know, I think the turnout in elections is often...
Oh, it's tiny. It's tiny, and so few people really know who they are.
It's a bit of a nonsense with the Lib Dems to make it a big policy, because the money saved, well, I don't know what it will pay.
Well, it's not going to pay for too many, maybe 2 or 3 officers per police and crime commissioner anyway, maybe a bit more. You, of course, famously left the Conservative Party and are now a member of Reform UK. So your party leader, Nigel Farage, I know you don't always agree with him, but he has said that he wants to create a minister for deportations to boot out foreign criminals as he slams what he calls an invasion of migrants. Do you agree with him? Is a minister for deportations needed?
A little bit, you know, akin to the point I was just making, actually. I think you do need people, like you need government departments focused on their main tasks. And you can have government departments that have too many tasks and they don't achieve anything. So actually having a minister whose sole, you know, get up every morning and all they think about is, can I get people who shouldn't be in this country deported? I think it's quite a good idea. I'd like to see the detail. And that's going to be a big challenge for the party I now support, because I think if Reform have any chance of winning the next election, it will be in an environment in which the wheels fell off the last Tory government, the wheels will have fallen off this Labour government, and people will really want to kick the tyres of a Reform manifesto. I think people are going to be much more sceptical of politicians' promises. So I like the idea, but I think we need to see the detail. And as Nigel Farage says, I know there's some people, Liberal Democrats no doubt, will terrible policy and extreme, but as Nigel Farage said today, this was something that David Blunkett, when he was Home Secretary, Labour Home Secretary, you know, made happen every single day of time of the week that he was Home Secretary. Deporting people who are not meant to be here doesn't seem to be, to me, it's extreme policy. It's common sense.
If they're here illegally and they've got to go, they've got to go.
Yeah. But they often don't.
You're absolutely right, and make all sorts of excuses as to why they can't, and we hear about those a lot. We're now in a situation as well, just speaking with sort of criminal justice with that subject, that pepper spray is to be used in young offenders' institutions as violence rises. You're now 14 times more likely as a prison officer or an officer in a young offenders' institution to be attacked by a young offender than an adult inmate. What do you think that says? This is really, really worrying.
It is. It's a horrible manifestation of a breakdown in society. And we often criticise the police services, the other frontline social, public services, but they are facing, I think, a breakdown in a lot of the civil courtesies and basics of society. You're talking just a few minutes ago about the Liberal Democrat policy on antisocial behaviour on buses and public transport. It may seem different, but it's the same basic. There's a basic attitude.
It's a side of the wedge. It's the aspect. I tell you what, just hold that thought for a second, because Dawn in Chelmsford had just sent me a message saying, I said to my wife, Peter, why are we paying for a weekly food shop? We could just steal it. Of course I wouldn't do it, but the size of the problem suggests a total breakdown of our society. And I think Dawn's right, and he illustrates a really interesting point, which is, if I, for example, little things, if I always put my earphones in when I'm listening to music or listening to a podcast or whatever on a bus or a train, then you go into shoplifting.
I'll tell you one thing, when you do hear people playing their phones out loud, it's never to podcasts.
It's never good music either. But then you go down the shoplifting side and you say, right, I'm not going to shoplift. Should I intervene? Should I not intervene? What's happening there? And then you go further down the line and you're talking about attacks on people in prison. And I just think there is a basic lack of respect in our society. I also worry that for people like Dawn, and the point that Dawn is illustrating is, where is the reward for playing by the rules?
Yeah.
Where is that? Because I think a lot of people don't see that. They see taxes very high, they see bills going up, and they say, you know, I'm knocking my pan in, I'm working hard, I'm trying to do the right thing here. And there's so many people who don't do that, who either the shoplifter isn't apprehended, the asylum seeker who fails in their asylum application is not deported, or alternatively, on a very, very minor scale, the person who is blaring the music out, nobody will go and say hi to them because they're worried about being attacked.
Of course, you're technically right, it is minor, but I think that's what was the theory about zero tolerance, broken window in
theory.
New York. And the thing is, I think a lot of people, they've seen a society which, you know, I play my music on the tube, no one does anything, and I steal some beer from a little shop, no one does anything. And all the time they're thinking, I can get away with whatever I want. And actually we are failing as a society by not nipping this sort of behaviour in the bud. It's only when a society pushes back to people who aren't naturally going to respect society, start to respect it because they fear it in some way. It's not always bad to fear social authority and the police.
Yeah, very, very interesting thoughts there. Tim, thank you for that. I think we'll leave it there, actually.
Well, thank you for naming me as a shoplifter on national broadcaster.
You went back, and good for you for doing so. It wasn't even an attack of conscience. It was just a realisation that you'd done it. So thank you for that. That's Tim Montgomery, who's a former number 10 advisor, now a member of Reform UK. Really interesting discussion with Tim, as it always is. What do you think of what he said? 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk to Henry Bolton in a second about this idea for a minister for deportations, and I definitely want to take more of your calls, texts and tweets as well. We've plenty of time between now and 7, so get them in. 0344 499 1000.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms. What you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Chris has been in touch and says, very interestingly, not even that we need to place officers in every high street in the town. You don't even need to do that, says Chris. Simply allow the public to deal with it. Give the general public the legal power to force someone to stop shoplifting and eject them from the shop. There's plenty of big fellas who'd be quite happy to drag someone out by the scruff of the neck. I don't want to get into the kind of legalities of this, but I'm not sure that's quite what people would want to do. I would leave it to the security guards, quite frankly. But there are a number of people who've had a bit of our have a go heroes. Certainly, Anne is in Somerset. She's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000, and I know that your daughter Anne had a horrific experience.
It was actually my granddaughter.
Your granddaughter, okay.
Yeah.
What happened?
Yes. Well, she used to cycle through this park backwards and forwards to work when she was about 16 in a supermarket. And she used to go sort of all hours in the morning, afternoon, late evening. And this one particular evening, she was coming back through the cycling through the park, and this gang of guys stopped her at knife point, took the bicycle off of her, and, she hightailed it home as fast as she could.
Yeah.
And I believe it was one of the neighbours was either ex-police or still in the police force. He got his troops out to look for these guys on the bicycle. Believe it or not, they found him still riding around in the park on the bike.
Right, yeah.
And they called my granddaughter to check that it was her bike and if this was the same guy. Yep, it was. So all they said was, right, apologise and give the bike back, and that was it. That's all they did.
So these were police officers who did this?
This was the police officers.
And they said, say sorry, give the bike back, that's it.
Yeah, and no, nothing else was done.
that is theft, that's intimidation, that's threats to the person.
I know.
There are a number of laws that have been broken there.
I know, and it turns out that this guy had a string of convictions that, that he's done it before.
I mean that is just terrifying for a 16-year-old. It's terrifying for anybody of any age. I mean, what did your granddaughter think about that?
Well, she was obviously very upset about it and distraught. And even the I don't know whether he was a neighbour, but he didn't arrest himself. He just called innocent of his mates. And he was absolutely disgusted with the fact that they just let him go.
Well, it's a final question, Anne, but it just I mean, do you have faith in the police after that experience?
I think they have a very difficult job, to be honest.
Yeah.
Their hands are tied left, right and centre, because even if they catch somebody and they actually get them into a court, what happens? They get a slap on the wrist, a suspended sentence. And, they say crime doesn't pay, but it's the only thing that does pay, I think.
Well, again, I asked the question, Anne, what is the point of following the rules? I'm not saying people should be breaking the law for any stretch of the imagination. I try to do all I can to stay within the law at all times. I'm sure the vast majority of people watching and listening to this programme do exactly the same thing. But where is the backup? Where is the reward? I just want to speak briefly to Mike in York. Mike, I understand you're a retailer yourself.
Yeah, evening, Peter.
Evening, hi. What's happened in you're a retailer, what's happened in your shop?
Well, not really. It's not really that. I've been a retailer for about 30 years. I really just wanted to answer a couple of the guys who have been on earlier.
Sure, go ahead.
You had the ex-police officer on who was talking about the CCTV is too blurry and we should detain people and we'd get a much better result from doing those things. And he's absolutely right. But that was then, and this is now. And the quality of the CCTV in the supermarkets has increased massively. It's all 1080 2K. You can get perfectly good pictures of everybody.
Yeah.
the ability to detain is there. In some of the supermarkets, they have detention rooms. But the fact is, none of that's going to happen anymore because the police don't attend. They just don't attend. They've no interest in attending.
That must be soul destroying for you as a retailer, Mike. When you just think, where's the backup here? Where's the police when you need them?
I think it was for a while. I think, but now there's kind of an apathy gone in, and I think that's a lot of times why people just get let go, because if they were detained, the best you could hope for if you phoned it through was you could be waiting for 4 hours, and you just haven't got in a retail environment. You just haven't got 4 hours to sit around, and then you probably get told, actually, we're not going to attend. But now it's more, you mostly get told, just report it online. And you get a crime number, and then that's it. That's over. You won't hear.
But that doesn't help. It may help you get some money back from your insurer, but it doesn't help in the longer term because your insurance premiums are going to go up, and it doesn't bring the perpetrators to justice in any way, does it, Mike?
No, but it adds it onto the crime figures, which helps.
Okay.
I mean, if you report it at all, which a lot doesn't, and then there was the guy from the union that was on about his security guys that were getting pulled into disciplinaries. And I'm aware of that. I am aware of that situation happening. But what's caused that really is that the retailers have got a duty of care to get everybody home safely. You know, all the staff, including the security guards, home safely. And the level of violence in some of the stores is such that they can't guarantee it. If you go into it and try and stop people, they can't guarantee that duty of care. And I think that's why the instructions come out from the retailers to say, don't do that, because otherwise they lose that duty of care.
Okay. Really interesting talking to you, Mike. Thank you very much. That's Mike in York. A number of people getting in touch. Hi, Peter. All security guards should be issued with and trained in the use of tasers. No contact, no risk. Put the thieves down. Paul in Leeds said, I had a similar experience to Tim. I left a shop and forgot to pay for my goods. It was only when the friendly shop staff chased me for half a mile and kindly reminded me of my silly but understandable oversight that I realised what a twit I am, says Paul in Leeds. And just a final one before we go to Henry Bolton from Sean in Edinburgh. He says, not only people blare out music without headphones in public, what annoys me is with they're on the phone, they put on the loudspeaker, and it makes me cringe to listen to their conversations. I'm not a fan of the Lib Dems, but well done to them for putting an excellent policy forward, says Sean. Very interesting. There, we'll continue to have these discussions. If you want to put your point across between now and 7, when Alex Phillips is in the studio, then it's 0344 499 1000. I want to speak to Henry Bolton now. He's international border control expert, about the idea that Nigel Farage has to create a minister for deportations to boot out foreign criminals, as Farage has slammed what he calls an invasion of migrants. He says this isn't a radical policy, it's merely accountability. Henry, what do you think? Good idea, bad idea?
Well, it's not a new idea, and in fact the Social Democrat Party have had this as formal policy for some years, that foreign national offenders who commit a crime that could potentially carry, they're found guilty of an offence that could carry a sentence of 6 months or more, should be deported and removed, as should anybody who is here on their ticket. Nigel is right in saying that you can't really do that whilst we're still subject to Article 8 of the the European Convention on Human Rights, which is the right to family life and the right to settled life. But even that, Article 8 of the ECHR does allow for, if it's in the public good, for public safety, it does allow Article 8 to be waived. So, but then we've got the Human Rights Act, and again, Nigel is right about that. The problem that I have with this is that we've got a habit in this country of politicians, and I have spoken to the most senior people in Reform about this in the past, but we have, so I include them. We have got the politicians at the national level who make promises and pledges to do various things and simply haven't assessed all of the implications, all of the factors, and have no plan for doing it. So there are parts of the reform plan that are simply unworkable. That's not to say I don't want them to work. it's not that I'm saying that we shouldn't be dealing with the small boats, etc. We absolutely should. There are absolutely ways to do it, but it is no good a politician standing up and saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z and having actually not worked through the various issues and second and third order effects of doing things. So that's where we're still in that environment where politicians are not bothering with the difficult work of the planning.
And if there were to be a minister for deportations, would there at least be the accountability to say the plan works, the plan doesn't work, that person then gets sacked or they change the plan?
I mean, we have ministers. We have people who are accountable. We have the Home Secretary. We have the junior ministers in the Home Office. We have the civil servants in the Home Office. We have directors of agencies and so on. We already have an agency, the Immigration Service, who are responsible for this. So it is just simply not working. And appointing a minister is not going to solve the problem. And this is not a criticism of reform. Please, nobody should take it that way. But the reality is that reform, if they find themselves in government in 2029 or at some point between now and then, at the moment they have 4 MPs. The Prime Minister has to, so Nigel in this case, so that's one of the 4 MPs out, has got to appoint around, heading for 80 different appointments.
That's right.
And so you are going to have already around about 77 thereabouts, 77, 79, whatever, people who are going to be occupying ministerial or other very senior posts who have never, ever been working in Whitehall or had experience of the House of Commons.
Tony Blair had absolutely no experience as a government minister, but when he became Prime Minister, neither had Gordon Brown, David Cameron didn't either. He had worked in government as an advisor, but not with executive power. So
I agree.
It is possible to go in as a new government, isn't it? I mean, Keir Starmer.
But I agree. But how many of us think that was all very successful? I don't know. I don't. So it can happen. Of course it can. But, let's be sort of realistic about where we are. It's fine if you go in with a plan. But this is the other thing that's going on at the moment. And I think I raise it because I think it's dangerous, not in a physical sense, but in a political sense, for the country or people in the country to think that all it takes is a Prime Minister to give an order. Do this.
Yeah.
Because actually it doesn't work like that. Even for Donald Trump, who spent 5-6 months spinning up his executive orders, which themselves are pieces of legislation, that was a lot of effort and a lot of work, a lot of teams, a lot of people working on that for many months. You can't do it. And the other thing then is that, you can order the Royal Navy into the Channel. And if you do order the Royal Navy to stop the boats, they will stop the boats if you give them the right rules of engagement and so on to do them. But you've got to be prepared for the consequences, not only in terms of the physical consequences in terms of danger to life, and the legal implications of all of that globally, and it's complicated. But also, you've got to think about where are you going to get these assets to do it. Richard Tice told me at one point the Royal Marines would be deployed to the Channel. Well, the Royal Marines protect the northern flank of NATO and the nuclear submarine facilities in Faz Lane. So you can do these things, but where is the plan? Yes. Where is take me through the steps, talk me through how leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, which, by the way, I absolutely support doing because it removes an obstacle, but talk me through the steps from leaving the ECHR to the boats actually stopping.
Yeah.
And then if you lay those steps out and the costs and who's going to do what and when they're going to do it and how they're going to be coordinated, then and only then will I say that a political party has any sort of credibility when they make these pledges. Okay. And a minister, we have ministers, there are people accountable. I do think there's consolidation needed. And I'm going to be talking about that in more depth in the coming weeks.
Well, no doubt we will talk more about that, Henry, and thank you very much indeed for your contribution this evening. That's Henry Bolton there, who's an international border control expert. Derek has been in touch on text, 87222, with the word talk in his text, and he says someone needs to get a grip on this country or else, says Derek. I don't think Derek's making a threat there. I think he's making a very good observation in that someone does need to get a grip on this country. There are lots of things that do not work. And we're certainly going to talk to more people about that as time goes on. In just a moment, we're going to speak to Will Geddes, a security expert and author of the book Parent Alert: How to Keep Your Kids Safe Online. This is because the government is considering a social media curfew for children, and Harry and Meghan have weighed in, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, calling for stronger protections for children from the dangers of social media, saying enough is not being done. Life is better off social media, says Prince Harry, adding he was grateful that his and Meghan's children were still too young to be online. We'll talk about this in a second here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Right then, the government is considering a social media curfew for children. This is similar to a TV watershed. The Technology Secretary, Peter Cardwell, has expressed concern over the harmful and addictive aspects of spending too much time online for under 16s. He said he is watching very carefully the impact of TikTok's introduction of a 10 p.m. curfew for under 16s and tools for parents to switch off access at set times. He's encouraging other companies to consider similar features. This comes as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Harry and Meghan, they're calling for stronger protections for children from the dangers of social media, saying enough is not being done. They've been unveiling a memorial in New York City, saying it's been dedicated to children who have died due to the harms of the internet. Prince Harry has been speaking to the BBC. He says, we want to make sure that things are changed so that no more kids are lost to social media. Life is better off social media, adding he was grateful that his and Meghan's children are still too young to be online. The Prince said, the easiest thing to say is keep your kids away from social media. The sad reality is the kids who aren't on social media normally get bullied at school because they can't be part of the same conversation as everyone else. Well, let's speak to Will Geddes. Will is a security expert. He's also written a book about this, how to keep your kids safe online. Will, what do you make of what the Technology Secretary and indeed Prince Harry are saying?
Well, there's a certain amount of truth to certainly what Kyle was saying in terms of, there needs to be some sort of controls, absolutely, and where technology companies and social media platforms, Peter, are going to work with certainly the Technology Secretary and with governments. It's helpful. And I think the point that Prince Harry made, which was about children being bullied because they're not part of a conversation, I totally get that. And there will be enormous amounts of peer pressure. However, this is a mighty, mighty mountain to climb. And fundamentally, it really comes down, Peter, to the controls which are already in place on most devices of parental controls, which can set time limits, which can prevent children going onto their phones. And ultimately, as I always say to any parent who says to me, Will, what do I do about controlling my kids' activities online? I always say, well, first and foremost, until such time as the kid actually pays for the phone and for its subscription to whichever airtime provider, the phone is yours. It is a loaner to them, and you should maintain control of it.
And it's very simple. And as you say, you know, there are controls there already, because people say, oh, we need legislation, we need the government to do something. But actually, the controls are there and can be used. It's just a matter of educating yourself in regard to setting those controls. And I'm sure there are very simple ways to do that, including your book, which I know will illustrate the issue to many people. I'm sure there are YouTube tutorials as well, where you can just go online and say, well, how do I actually limit what my kid sees online? Because a lot of parents say, oh, something needs to be done, but actually they're often the ones who need to do it.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things really to unpick from that, Peter, and you've covered, you know, some really good points there. The first of which is the fact that there are controls in place, and the parents, if they go on YouTube, they'll find various different ways for whichever device that they've given to their child to enable them to put those controls in place. But there are three areas which I would underpin, and I'm really concerned about central government having too much control over our devices and what we see and what we access. And yes, for younger people, I mean, in my book, I cover the ages of 7 to 17. And realistically, between 7 and 13, it's about best practice. And from 13 to 17, it's crisis management. But there are also guides in the book, and I'm not just trying to give a blatant plug here, but there are guides in my book, and you can find them elsewhere online, where what age should a child have access to certain elements or features on an actual phone itself. And when psychologically they can be prepared and equipped to be able to deal with what can be a pretty horrific world out there, and there's many, many rabbit holes that can go down. But really it comes down to the fact that there are three things which I always say underpins things with parents with kids, and it's the 3 T's. The first of which is basically trust. Children, even if you put controls in place, the government puts on a curfew. Kids will access using VPNs, using various other different means or other devices.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Will, but that is a really, really interesting point. And just texting me right now is someone who was a senior figure in the Conservative government previously, who was working around this issue, and has just said to me, I'm listening in, Peter, we looked at this curfew issue, but it was so complicated and so easy for kids to get around it. It was dismissed. It will also let companies off the hook with so much of the horrific content, because after the curfew, you can't enforce the Online Safety Act, because the company's defence is that the children shouldn't be online at those times anyway. So I think supporting your point there.
Absolutely. So the first thing really is you've got to consider that there has got to be trust between obviously the parent and the child. If you put parental controls on, the kids will see it as a challenge, and they will find ways to navigate around it. Probably, certainly the age of 13, they will pass their parents in terms of their technological know-how and abilities to be able to circumvent things like parental controls. It's just a challenge to break them. The second thing is talking. Parents cannot divorce themselves from the fact that children will have an online life. And in the same way as the kid wants to go out and play with Tommy and Jane and whatever, the parent will say, well, how do you know Tommy and Jane? Is it from school? If they have regular friends online, the parents should be involved in exactly who those friends are. Yeah. And then very, very lastly, it's teamwork. It's talking with the child. It's engaging in and understanding what they're doing online, so that when the kid comes unstuck and they get themselves into trouble, and that might not have been intentional, they can come to their parent without feeling that the parent's going to club them over the head or shout, scream at them, maybe not initially, but certainly will want to talk to them and say, great, let's get you out of this problem.
Absolutely. Will, thank you. That's Will Geddes there, security expert and author of the book Parent Alert, How to Keep Your Kids Safe Online. And that senior figure in the Conservative government who's just been in touch with me, just messaging me, listening to this, says TV content is easy to regulate with so few providers, all requiring a broadcast licence. Internet content is obviously much harder because everyone can be a content creator. It's a very, very good point there from that person. Thank you to Terry and Slough, who says, hi Peter, reform can't be any worse than this budget bunch of clowns that are ruining this country now, says Terry and Slough. Ellie in Gosport says, great show as always, Peter. Henry Bolton is being very negative. As far as I know, there's 4 years until the next general election. There's plenty of time to formulate and finesse a plan for stopping the boots. The negativity and can't-do attitude has got us into the horrendous mess in the first place. Well, Ellie, I'm glad you're optimistic, because there's a lot to be optimistic about, but there's a lot I think we need to question as well. Loads of people want to get in on shoplifting. I want to get as many of them on the phone as possible between now and 7 o'clock when Alex Phillips takes over. Stay with us here on Talk.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything, because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms, but what you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Cormac is in Dorset and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Cormac, I understand you are a shop owner yourself. What's happened to you?
A couple of months ago, we had
Cormac, I'm sorry, I just can't hear you, Cormac. We'll get you back on a better line. Kevin's in Portsmouth and has some thoughts on shoplifting. Kevin, what would you like to say?
Good evening, Peter.
Good evening.
Right, shoplifting. You get caught stealing, you go to jail for a year. Come out, do it again, you go to jail for 2 years, then 4, then 8, then 16, then 32. Am I going to lock up somebody for 32 years for stealing from them? Cops pick them up, straight through the magistrate's court, in you go for however long it may be. 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, no early release, no parole, we'll get rid of that. All this nonsense would stop. And by the way, if you're not British, you get deported. Every single religion that I can think of says stealing is a sin.
Yes.
Stealing is wrong.
Yes.
Okay? You come over here, you go thieving, that's it, you can go back to whichever hellhole you came from.
I don't disagree, Kevin, I don't disagree with a single word that you've said. I think everything you said is perfectly sensible. How likely is it to happen, is my question.
Not at all. I actually proposed a Minimum Sentences Act to Richard Tice on this very station.
Right.
And I met him at one of the reform conferences. He said, well, go and talk to Anne Widdecombe about it. She was lukewarm on the idea, saying, well, we haven't got the prison spaces. Hey, build a prison camp.
Yeah.
Okay, General O'Connor captured 200,000 Italian prisoners in the space of about 10 days to a fortnight in the Libyan desert in 1941. In the desert, nothing there, no B&Q, nothing. Everything had to come down a single track road on 1940s lorries, which had a low payload and variable reliability. He managed it, and here we are in the 21st century, all our computers and internet, everything else, and we can't do it. I'm sorry. We've got miles and miles and miles of publicly owned land owned by the Ministry of Defence, stick a prison camp in a corner, chuck them all in there.
There are ways to do it, and as we found over and over again, Kevin, if the government actually wants to do something, if it actually wants to deal with the riots, if it actually wants to sort out Scunthorpe, for example, and the blast furnace there, and British Steel, they can do it. They have the resources. They can do it if they really want to do it. Cormac is in Dorset. We've got him back on a better line. Cormac, I hope I can hear you this time. Go ahead.
Hello, Peter. Can you hear me?
Much better, Cormac. Go ahead.
Excellent. Yes, I've got a shop in Weymouth, and a couple of months ago we had two people come in about half an hour before we closed in the evening. I wasn't on duty that day. One of my colleagues was, and they kind of came in, had a quick look around for 20 or 30 seconds, and it's a pet shop, went up to the dog beds, grabbed a couple of dog beds worth well over 100 quid, and then straight out the door onto their push bikes, and they were gone. My member of staff who was in there, it all happened very, very quickly, and she started to think something was not quite right as they were just literally heading to the door, and she walked up and they'd hopped on the bikes and they were gone. So she was obviously very annoyed about the situation and angry. That was on a Friday. The following Monday, I was in the shop, and they had the balls to walk back into the shop, broad daylight, 2 o'clock on a Monday afternoon.
Yeah.
Now, I'd spent all of Saturday going through the CCTV.
So you knew their faces well.
I knew their faces, and I tell you what, Jesus, they walked into that shop, and I was in mid-sentence to a customer, and I just said, "Excuse me," and went straight up to them, confronted them. I was expecting one of two things. I was expecting for them to turn and run out the door, or to attack me.
Okay.
I was completely prepared to be attacked and ready to defend
The
myself.
adrenaline must have been pumping, Cormac.
It was. And they did the third thing that I didn't expect. They completely denied it, cool as a cucumber.
Wow. So what happened then?
After about 20 seconds, I was kind of like, you're not running away, you're not attacking me.
Yeah.
What's going to happen now? And then I knew the name of the customer at the counter. I had 3 or 4 customers in the shop as well. And I just shouted over to the lady I knew, and I said, "Can you call the police, please?" And then at that point, they turned around, headed for the door, and I was right behind them, saying to them, "I know who you are. I know what you look like. Don't ever come back here again."
Yeah.
And then, funnily enough, I put it onto our social media a short while later, and within 2 hours, I had 7 direct messages of people telling me their names. And they said, actually, yeah, they're known for this. They do it all the time. They never get challenged. They go into Asda, they go into supermarkets, they take loads of booze. Nobody ever challenges them. So I hope my challenge will deter them from coming back to my shop.
And when you knew their names and when you had that CCTV footage, did you bring that to the police, or what happened next?
I did, yeah. I contacted the police. I mean, the police were great. I actually know a few police, and anyone I knew said, "We're really sorry, we can't give you the service that we want to give you. We're not able to do it."
Wow.
Constraints, and it upsets us because we want to serve you, we want to help you, but we don't have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
I've gone through the process. I filled out the forms. My member of staff filled out a witness statement, sent that in. It's being processed. It's being looked at. I've sent all the CCTV footage. I'm just waiting to hear back. We know who they are. They know who they are.
Cormac, I tell you what. Would you keep me updated on this? Would you? When you hear something, wait till it's one of my shows. Ring in. The producers will remember your name, and we'll put you back on again. I'd love to hear the process and what happens. Obviously, you've been very careful. You haven't mentioned anyone's name. You haven't given us any details that would incriminate anybody or would make any problems with legality or anything. You've been very careful with that, and I appreciate that. But I'd love to hear the ending of this story when you have an ending, Cormac. Will you give us another ring?
I will indeed.
Top man. Thank you very much indeed. That's Cormac in Dorset. We will catch up with him when there's more on that story. Robbie in Dundee wants to talk about music on public transport. Robbie, what do you make of the Liberal Democrats' policy?
It just seems besides the point, Peter. It just seems to be, I don't know, the house is on fire and you're wanting to cut the grass. It just seems to be...
so it's perhaps skirting around the issue. What do you think needs to be done?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're slowly facing a complete breakdown in law and order. I don't know how we're going to write this. And
but maybe just maybe, Robbie, if we start sorting the tiny things, maybe the bigger things will follow. Or is that too optimistic?
I don't know. There's a fine line between optimism and naivety, I suppose.
Yeah.
I just find. I just think that something's going to have to give. Way leads to way, and if you keep on incentivizing bad things and de-incentivizing good things, there's only one way we're going to go.
Robbie, thanks for your thoughts. Really appreciate that. Robbie in Dundee there. Amy is in Derbyshire. Amy, whereabouts in Derbyshire are you?
Hello, up in Glossop.
Are you there, Amy?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Roughly whereabouts in Derbyshire are you?
I'm right at the top up in Glossop.
Oh, lovely. It's a lovely part of the world. I worked for BBC Radio Derby back in the day. Amy, tell us your thoughts on shoplifting.
So I currently work for the police.
Okay.
And I just feel that if the general public knew or could just see a day in the life of what we have to deal with and the immense pressure we're under, they would completely then understand that we need help in the police. It is just so understaffed. It's so underfunded.
So are you a police officer yourself, Amy?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So just talk us through that. I'll give you a couple of minutes here. There's a little bit of time, Amy. Just talk us through the pressures you're under, a day in the life, and what these kind of, people say, why can't you solve shoplifting? Why can't you deal with this? Just tell us what it's like for you.
Well, you'll have 999 calls stacking as soon as you come in. You've got the 999 calls, 101 calls that are coming through that you immediately need to attend to.
Yep.
So they can take up your whole day. Before you even get to them, the things that are getting reported that we would call, that are coming in, over 101, your shoplifting, things like that, that we would go out to as a secondary thing that aren't an immediate.
Yep.
So sometimes you may not be able to get to your cases for weeks because you are just back to back. You're continuously off late on your shift continuously, so you're not ever. Sometimes you won't get to these cases for ages. And then if you're saying, I know on your show it said something 500,000 shopliftings.
Yeah.
If you're thinking that volume coming through. A case to put together, by the time you've arrested somebody, put a case together, that could be a couple of days. And that could be for something as minor as, say a £30 shoplifting. That's 2 or 3 days, sometimes a week of work for an officer.
Why does it take so long, Amy? I'm sure you're working as efficiently, and many police officers are doing the best job they can. But some people might say, but if it's pretty straightforward, if there's CCTV footage, if there's a witness statement, why does it take so long?
I agree with you. A lot of it is bureaucracy. There are the level of paperwork is exorbitant. It's ridiculous. And then you've got the CPS that will come back to you. Issues with the defence, that's got to go through a trial if they deny it. You've got issues with ID. If they say that's not me in the footage, you've got to go through a whole ID process. That's another thing all on its own.
So what's the ID process? Just to make sure it's the right person, essentially?
Yeah. If you've got any witnesses, that can take a long time. That can take weeks if they agree to it. So this is the thing. There's a lot in the process that people don't realise how much time it takes. And then we're told what to prioritise. We're told, right, obviously the most serious crimes, you've got to get out to this and you've got to get out to that, and you've got to make sure that you're giving a good service to the people who, dealing with violent crime and are victims of violent crime, which of course you should. But then at the same time, we're being told that the general public want, the shoplifting, burglaries and things like that, which we want to also look at, but we're being pulled in so many different directions.
What's the solution, Amy? What could make your life easier if you were cloned, if you had more officers? Is that it, or are there systematic changes that need to happen?
I think more officers. I think an overhaul of policing, the bureaucracy, the amount of paperwork, streamlining it. I think as well, attitudes towards police would help. The constant abuse, the hate we get.
What have you had, Amy? What have people said to you? Just obviously we're
on a daily basis.
Obviously we're aware that there might be children listening, and we want to be careful what we say.
You can imagine the kind of verbal abuse, getting walked down to the street, getting spat at, things thrown at you, the constant abuse. Any tiny little inflection that you've got, that a spot on your face, anything, will just get torn apart. And that's not talking about the physical assaults.
Have you been physically assaulted, Amy?
Yeah. Threatened. That's a daily thing. So this is what people aren't seeing, and I think it doesn't help when constantly in the news and media the police are just getting told off for things that we have no control over. You know, the bosses are telling us to do those things. Often those aren't necessarily, you know, we get told what we need to prioritise, what our duties are. So often it's the police getting constant, you know, hate for things that can, and a lot of the times are the courts. They're nothing to do with police. Yes. We're getting blamed for sentences and not doing things with these shoplifters. I can tell you now, the shoplifters I've had, that if I can send them to court every other day, and they continuously come back out on, you know, with a fine that they won't pay. Yes. So I can only do so much. I can keep locking them up, keep sending them in front of a judge. If they don't do anything, then it does look bad on us, and I understand that, but it's the court.
Amy, final question. I've got to talk to Alex Phillips just for a second, but just final question. There's so much frustration in what you've said. Yeah. Why do you do the job?
I do love my job. I do love it, and I love helping people. And it's for those moments when you do genuinely make a difference that makes it all worth it. And majority of officers are like that. They do it because it's worth it for those moments where you do get the wins. But I just want to say that on majority of officers genuinely care, and they want to do the shoplift. They want to get out to the burger. They want to do those things. They're affecting their friends and family and their lives as well. But we just don't. I just wish we had the staff and capacity to do those things.
Amy, I have learned a heck of a lot from what you've told me in the last 4 or 5 minutes, and I want to thank you for making the call. That's Amy in Derbyshire. They're a serving police officer. I would imagine Amy isn't her real name, but that's fine in this case. Very, very interesting call. Alex, shoplifting, who'd have thought it was such a big issue that so many people had so much to say about?
It's a massive issue.
It's a huge issue, over 500,000 recorded every year.
So where I live in London, on the main road, the thoroughfare, which is technically the high street of my borough, a load of the main shops, like the cooperative, like Boots, one of the doors is boarded up. So you can only go in and exit by the same door because the amount of people looting, and now the Co-op on my street,